Historical photographs can act like a time capsule, preserving moments for decades or even centuries. But even though a picture may say 1,000 words, it doesn't always tell the whole story. The NASA Apollo missions provided humanity's first images of what the world looks like from another celestial body. Up until Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon, scientists could only speculate about what space might look like from the lunar surface. Photographs from the moon lined up with previous speculations about what the sun, the stars, and the Earth itself would look like. But some photographs from the Apollo missions show things that nobody was expecting. In particular, a small group of photos from the Apollo 14 mission show a mysterious anomaly that still remains unexplained to this day. Apollo 14 was the third NASA mission to land on the surface of the moon. The mission went through a lot of changes, largely due to the near disaster that was the Apollo 13 mission. Apollo 13 took place in April of 1970 and planned to land at the Fra Mauro Formation. But 2 days into the mission, the oxygen tank in the service module malfunctioned, and the landing had to be abandoned. The next Apollo mission was supposed to take place shortly after Apollo 13, but scientists at NASA wanted to make sure the same malfunction wouldn't happen again. Apollo 14 was postponed until January of 1971. Originally, the Littrow crater had been intended as the destination for the mission, but this was changed to the Fra Mauro Formation, the intended landing site of Apollo 13. This formation is named after a crater of the same name, found just south of the moon's equator. The crater was formed by debris from an impact that created the nearby Mare Imbrium billions of years ago. The site was deemed to be of scientific importance and could help scientists back on Earth understand the geology of the moon and its history. The Apollo 14 mission started smoothly, even with the delays due to bad weather at the launch site. But the mission faced two problems after takeoff. The first was a malfunctioning abort signal, which had been switched on without the button being pressed. This was solved when a computer scientist back in Houston created a code to bypass the signal. The second problem concerned the docking mechanism, which wouldn't activate. Eventually, the astronauts had to start a hard dock procedure, which finally forced the mechanisms to work. With two near disasters out of the way, the landing module and Terrace finally touched down on the lunar surface. Alan Shepard and Edgar Mitchell spent 33.5 hours on the surface of the moon, with 2 lengthy moonwalks. During that time, they collected rock samples, tried to make it to a nearby crater, and even played golf with a golf club that Shepard had brought with him. Of course, during this time, they also took countless photographs. Photos were also taken from the module that continued to orbit the moon, even as the 2 of the 3 astronauts walked on the surface. After the mission was complete, the 3 astronauts returned to Earth, splashing down in the Pacific Ocean, almost exactly 9 days after the rocket had taken off. With Shepard, Mitchell, and command module pilot Stuart Roosa back on Earth, scientists got to work analyzing the valuable data that had been gathered during the mission. Rock samples that had been collected were sent to laboratories around the world in an effort to get as much information as possible about what might be going on beneath the Earth's surface. The photos taken during the mission were also gathered and analyzed, but most of these wouldn't be seen by the public for decades. This wasn't part of any cover-up. Most of the photos taken during the Apollo 14 mission look extremely similar. They show the gray and white lunar surface, covered in craters and gentle hills. Some seem to show strange objects in the sky, but these are explained as lens flares or an artifact created during the development process. When the internet began to become more popular, the images from the Apollo 14 mission, along with other NASA missions, were uploaded to dedicated sites, where space enthusiasts could get a close-up at what our nearest neighbor looked like. It was only then that a strange, unexplained anomaly was spotted. In 7 photos taken from the surface of the moon, a strange blue light hangs in the night sky. The photos were taken by Alan Shepard, the first American to ever be sent to space, and also the mission commander. 6 of the photos are taken during a pan from a position southeast of the lunar module, and the 7th from a position west of the module. In each photo, the blue light is slightly different and appears in a different place in the night sky. In one of the images, labeled AS14669299, the light is seen just above the horizon, while the other images show it higher up in the night sky. Interestingly, these images don't seem to be part of a sequence. If the numbers of the images indicate the order they were taken, the image with the light near the horizon was neither the first nor the last photo taken. This seems to suggest the light wasn't something rising into the night sky, and was moving somewhat erratically. There are also images in the sequence that don't show the mysterious blue light. It's possible it was simply out of the shot during this time, or it may have been appearing and disappearing in the night sky. Some of the images seem to show individual points of light, as if the anomaly is a collection of stars shrouded in a blue mist. Others simply show the blue smudge. What the mysterious blue light is has never been addressed. Each image on the NASA website comes with a description of what's being shown. Photographs with otherwise mysterious anomalies come with a caption explaining the anomaly as a lens flare or a photograph artifact. No such explanations come with the blue lights. It'll come as no surprise to most people that the 1973 horror film The Exorcist caused a lot of disapproval once it had been viewed by audiences. It remains one of the most famous horror movies of all time, but it's been condemned by many who feel that it makes use of an unnecessary amount of profanity and gore, and that it misrepresents the Catholic Church. Because of its narrative, the film deals with many religious aspects, and it was always likely to tread on someone's toes. When it was first screened in movie theaters, many people had to leave halfway through due to the graphic nature of the visuals, with some reporting that they felt sick or even fainted in horror. While the film is very loosely based on actual events, much of it is fictional and was never intended to draw the ire of anyone, but this ended up being the case. The plot centers around a 12-year-old girl named Reagan, whose mother is a successful actress, Chris McNeil. Before long, Chris starts noticing that Reagan is displaying some odd and alarming behavior. At first, her behavior doesn't cause too much concern, but when her bed starts inexplicably shaking and she starts to become violent, Chris realizes that she needs to find help for her daughter. Reagan starts speaking in unnatural voices and indecipherable languages, but doctors are unable to find anything wrong with her. She becomes unnaturally strong and at one point causes Burke Dennings, a friend of Chris's, to lose his life. Soon, Reagan's appearance begins to change. Her face becomes unrecognizable, and she uses profanities that her mother is certain she's never even heard before. They're forced to strap her to her bed for her own protection and theirs, since she's by this point become nearly unstoppable and extremely violent. Chris summons Father Damien Karras, as it's now become obvious that Reagan is possessed by a demon, since she claims to be the devil himself. The demon states that he will not leave until she loses her life, and the decision is made to perform an exorcism. The exorcism is fraught with danger, as Reagan attempts to deceive the priests who are tending to her, and does her best to harm them. When one of the priests loses his life due to a heart attack, Karras loses his temper and attacks Reagan, demanding that the demon take his life instead. She rips his St. Joseph medallion from his neck and possesses him, after which he jumps out of the window, knowing that Reagan has been saved. Reagan then wakes up but has no memory of the events that have transpired, and her soul is saved. The depiction of being possessed took many people off guard, and they felt that the film went too far. The Catholic Church was unimpressed with the way in which the priests were depicted, and stated it was unsuitable for a wide audience, and several cardinals in Boston lobbied for it to be banned. Home sales of the movie were banned in the UK until 1988, when it was decided that it would no longer have the negative impact that it once did. It was also banned or restricted in Scotland, Ireland, and Tunisia, with the latter country labeling it as unjustified propaganda in favor of Christianity. Despite all this controversy, The Exorcist remains one of the most famous horror movies ever made, partly aided by the outrage that it sparked in the 1970s. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster is possibly the most well-known and well-studied nuclear disaster in human history. Almost 40 years have passed since the catastrophic test in April of 1986, but there are still many mysteries that surround the disaster and its outcomes. The infamous nuclear disaster took place in the early morning hours of April 26, 1986, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in northern Ukraine. A test designed to simulate what would happen if the cooling turbines lost power went disastrously wrong. A combination of design flaws and human error led to power surges and eventually a steam eruption and a meltdown. This destroyed the building housing the reactor and started a fire that sent radioactive particles across Europe. Officials tried to hide the extent of the disaster. Evacuations from the areas surrounding the power plant were slow, and countless people were exposed to radiation they had no way of knowing about. When the evacuation orders did eventually come in, people were told that it would only be for a short period of time. Belongings and even family pets were left behind. Decades later, the families still haven't been able to return. The disaster was eventually contained, but not before radioactive particles reached as far away as Iceland and France in the west and China in the east. Given the amount of secrecy that followed the disaster, it's not currently known how many people lost their lives in the immediate aftermath. Estimates range from less than 100 to thousands of people. Even harder to determine is the number of people who suffered health problems years or even decades after the disaster. Radioactive particles can cause mutations. This is done by damaging the DNA inside individual cells. The damaged DNA might not be able to replicate itself, or may create cells with this new unusual DNA. The effects of these mutations are sometimes obvious. Some children born after the disaster developed deformities due to this damage to their DNA, but other effects are less obvious. Cancers are a common result of exposure to radioactivity, but it's hard to determine which cancers were directly caused by the radiation. But while there are still some unanswered questions about the human impact of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, the impact on wildlife is even more mysterious. When people left the area surrounding the nuclear power plant, they didn't return. Many towns were completely wiped from the map. The abandoned town of Pripyat has become a popular destination for the more adventurous explorers, but even this has remained relatively untouched since the disaster. Today, the Chernobyl exclusion zone encompasses 1,000 square miles. The neighboring state radioecological reserve in Belarus is 835 square miles. Human activity in these areas is extremely low and mostly consists of scientific research trying to understand how the radioactive fallout of the disaster has affected the environment. In recent years, there have been claims that wildlife is now thriving in these areas. Without human factors such as hunting and the destruction of habitats, rare species have been able to grow in population size within the exclusion zones. The Mongolian wild horse is one species that has allegedly made its home in this slice of radioactive wilderness. The horse is endangered and was once extinct in the wild. In the 1990s, 31 of these horses were released into the exclusion zone, and their population has increased since. Photos from within the exclusion zone show foxes, bison, and other large mammals, as well as birds and reptiles apparently making a home for themselves in the place where humans have abandoned. But this doesn't tell the entire story. This disturbing photograph was captured at the Ukrainian National Chernobyl Museum. The museum aims to honor those who lost their lives in the disaster and remind people of what can happen when nuclear power goes wrong. It has thousands of specimens and relics related to the disaster, including the preserved remains of this creature. When this photo was shared online, people reacted with a mixture of fascination and disgust. Even the species of the animal photographed was unclear to some. The caption seen beneath the creature states that it's a piglet with dipygus. It's a rare genetic mutation that causes the individual to develop two pelvises and duplicates the lower body parts. What exactly causes dipygus is still unknown to science, but it can be assumed that in this case, it was the result of radiation the piglet was exposed to. Unfortunately, not much information on this individual specimen is available. The caption in the image lists the date as 1987, which is likely when the creature was born. It's unlikely the creature survived long after birth, if it lived at all. Assuming the date listed is correct, the piglet hadn't even been conceived when the nuclear disaster took place. The gestation period for piglets is less than 4 months, and it would have been the piglets' parents who were exposed to the nuclear radiation from the blast. Of course, the radiation remained at high levels in the surrounding area after the initial blast, and would have consumed radioactive plants in that year. But it may have been the direct effects of the initial blast that caused the mutations seen in this disturbing photograph. Radionuclides can damage DNA stored in gametes, which then pass the mutated DNA to the offspring of the affected creatures. It's possible the piglet's parents showed no signs of any mutations at all, and it was only when the second generation of animals was born that the horrors were truly realized. This is one of the reasons why the extent of the damage done to the wildlife surrounding Chernobyl is still a mystery to scientists. Some scientists have claimed that population levels of certain species in the Chernobyl exclusion zone are much lower today than they are in areas without radiation. This is even the case in areas with low levels of radiation, which scientists previously believed may be safe for animals. These studies are disputed by other scientists who believe the research is flawed. But even if the population levels are lower, figuring out exactly why this is the case isn't that simple. It could be that the radiation that's still present today is impacting the health of these creatures. But it could also be that the effects of the initial burst of radiation are still causing the damage. In laboratory settings, cells exposed to radiation don't immediately show signs of damaged DNA. But the possibility of damage being done is passed on to future generations, resulting in mutations much further down the line. Like in the case of this piglet, the animals may not have had to witness the disaster themselves to be impacted by the radiation released. Another factor in this debate is that the population sizes alone don't determine the health of a species. The population may be large, partially due to animals moving into the area after humans leave. But exposure to radiation over time could cause shorter lifespans and an increase in health problems that may not be seen in trail cameras and similar observation techniques. Baa Baa Black Sheep is an old classic, one that everyone knows.
Baa Baa Black Sheep, have you any wool?
In preschool, we sang it in unison about the black sheep and his 3 bags of wool that he was kindly distributing around town, except the little shepherd boy who lived down the lane, depending on which version you heard. At face value, this nursery rhyme was just that, an innocent children's song. It's not until you realize that this rhythmic lyrical piece dates back much, much further than the 1990s. It was first publicized in the 18th century, for which the word disturbing can be used synonymously. While we may not know its exact origins, Baa Baa Black Sheep was first discovered in 1744, which can be sung to the 18th century French melody of "Oh, Shall I Tell You, Mother?" similar to the tune of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." The lyrics referred to a personified conversation between a sheep and its wool, where it's asked if it has any wool to give. The sheep's response was yes, 3 bags full. He then proceeds to mention to whom each of the bags would go. 1 for the master, 1 for the dame, but none for the little boy who lived down the lane. Presumably a poor shepherd boy who received none of the wool from the sheep that he had reared. It was a straightforward song, whimsical and innocent. But instead, it refers to something far more terrifying: taxes. A modern scholar began to dissect the meaning behind these much-loved lyrics and uncovered a hidden meaning. Baa Baa Black Sheep is really a song about the Great Custom, a tax on wool that was introduced in the 13th century by King Edward I. Under the imposed law, 1/3 of the cost of 1 sack of wool would go to the king, another would go to the church, and 1 would go to the farmer. And by the time it was all distributed, there'd be none left for the poor boy who lived down the lane. In the 13th century, the wool trade was a significant part of England's economy, driven by high demand for cloth making. When King Edward I returned from the Crusades, though, he was in need of more money to pay for those military expeditions, and so the Great Custom was introduced. This meant that the master and the dame were not a nice elderly couple wanting to buy some materials to knit with, but were rather representing the nobles who took their cut of the wool taxes. The narrative certainly fits well with the history of taxation and the grabbing of money committed by the church and the monarchy of that era. With all 3 bags of wool having been distributed, there would subsequently be none left for the boy. But later adaptations included 1/3 being given to him, but only to make it sound more upbeat, since it was being taught to children. This seemingly normal-looking photo was taken a few weeks before Christmas in 1929. Charlie Lawson drove his family from the small farming community of Germantown, North Carolina, to the nearby metropolis of Winston-Salem. Charlie had bought himself, his wife, Fanny, and their 7 children new outfits, which he instructed them to wear on the drive to a photography studio. In the professional family portrait photo, Charlie and Fanny are pictured in the back right, with Fanny holding baby Mary Lou. Clustered around them, all with serious expressions on their faces, are their 6 children, ages 2 to 17. The photo has a dark and disturbing backstory. For just a few weeks later, all but one of the Lawson family members in the picture would be gone. On Christmas morning, 1929, the oldest daughter, 17-year-old Marie, woke up early to prepare special cakes. Charlie and his oldest son, 16-year-old Arthur, went on a morning hunting expedition. After a short time, Charlie sent his son to town to buy more hunting supplies. Then Charlie returned to the farm. As he walked back to his home, Charlie happened upon his 2 daughters, 12-year-old Carrie and 7-year-old Maybelle, heading to visit their aunt and uncle. They would never make it. As the real horror story goes, Charlie took the lives of his daughters, first with his hunting equipment, then with the handle of a farming hoe. Charlie went home and did the same to his wife as she sat upon the porch. In the kitchen, he took down Marie, age 17, as she cooked, and then his youngest sons, James, age 2, and Raymond, age 4. Even the 4-month-old baby, Mary Lou, was not spared. As his last act, Charlie ran into the woods and ended the night of horror with his own life. Next to him, crime scene investigators found letters written to his parents and a note that simply read, "Blame nobody but I." There are different stories of what happened next. In one version, their teenage son Arthur returned home and saw the bodies of his family. Others say it was relatives visiting for the holiday. The Lawson family was buried in a single plot, at the funeral that drew more than 1,500 mourners from across the state. To this day, no one knows the true story behind this terrible crime. There have been some unsubstantiated rumors that his oldest daughter, Marie, was pregnant with his child. Today, all that remains of Charlie and his family is the unnerving image taken just weeks before the dark and disturbing backstory, in which he turned on his wife and children. Sometimes, a song is recorded with the best intentions, since it's aimed at helping someone in an unthinkable situation. And while it's popular at the time, it's later labeled as offensive and naive, as is the case with the song "Do They Know It's Christmas," which was performed by the Live Aid Collective. The idea for the song came to light through a series of news reports in 1983. At the time, the people of Ethiopia were in dire need of aid as famine had broken out, and the images and reports that were being broadcast on the news in Britain left people shocked. Schools started raising funds and sending packaged food to the region. Churches held bake sales to raise money for the cause. And 2 people, singer Bob Geldof and his wife at the time, TV presenter Paula Yates, decided to do something more substantial, since they were deeply affected by what they saw on the news. At the time, Ethiopia was experiencing a severe drought, and thanks to that country's government's failure to act accordingly, its citizens started to starve since they were unable to grow crops and their livestock could no longer survive. To make matters worse, the country was rife with political instability, and when the government eventually decided to intervene, they were woefully underprepared to help the 8 million people who no longer had any food to eat or water to drink. Geldof and Midge Yor decided to start a relief effort of their own, and they contacted every musician that they knew, asking them to perform in a group that became known as Live Aid. At first, it was decided that they'd record a cover of a popular song together, but issues with the rights to the song soon cropped up, and so it was decided that a new song had to be written from scratch. Hence, Do They Know It's Christmas was born. Time was of the essence, since the track had to be released to the public before Christmas that year, if it were to have the desired effect, and luckily many prominent artists decided to join the effort. This included Sting, George Michael, Paul Weller, Phil Collins, members of Duran Duran, Boy George, Bono from U2, and many others. Paul Young sang the song's opening lines, a task that was originally given to David Bowie, but when Bowie couldn't make it to the studio in time, Young stepped up. Once the song was recorded, an accompanying music video was released, and the people of the world were urged to buy the single since all the proceeds would be donated to the hunger relief effort in Ethiopia. £8 million were raised in the first year after the song's release, and it became the fastest-selling single in the history of the UK charts. There's no doubt that this money brought some relief to the people of Ethiopia, but it's since been criticized as being naive and damaging. People feel that it only focused on the Ethiopian struggle, while other African countries were in similar situations, with no relief being offered. Furthermore, no one explained to the public what the cause of the famine was, and the track painted all of Africa in the same light, when some countries on that continent weren't thriving. While there's no doubt that the song helped bring some relief to the region, efforts are now being made to establish long-term solutions in an effort to bring the terrible conditions in Ethiopia to an end. Trying to identify photos taken decades or even centuries ago can feel like an impossible task. These photos are often several steps removed from the person who took them, with the images passed from owner to owner without the identifying information going along with them. But even when these mysteries seem impossible to solve, there is hope that an answer may be found, as was the case with a mysterious collection of World War II photographs. The photos were first uncovered in 2020 by a French woman named Stephanie Coulou. Stephanie was a collector of historic photos, and when she saw an old photo album at a flea market in the south of France, she knew she had to have it. Written on the first page of the album was a note. It began, quote, "In June 1940, a Parisian stroller armed himself with his camera to capture many scenes of the occupying army. He took a lot of risks, walked around a lot, and many of these pictures reached London." It ended with a message urging later readers to have the courage to look at the images. Who wrote the note was only the first mystery that Stephanie would collect. The album contained 377 black and white photographs taken from around Paris between 1940 and 1942. Germany started its occupation of Paris in June of 1940. Of the 3 million people who had called the city their home before the occupation, 2 million fled that summer. Some would later return, but in the first few months of the occupation, Paris resembled a ghost town. The only people who were really out and about on the streets were troops. It would be a while before organized resistance groups started to take form in Paris and elsewhere in France, but that didn't mean there weren't people committing acts of resistance earlier. The anonymous photographer who captured these images was one of them. There are many photos of Paris during this time period, but almost all of them were taken by German forces, or by people given special permission by the occupying forces. Taking photos outdoors was strictly prohibited, and even taking a photo out of a window could lead to punishment. That meant that the images that survive today mostly show a Paris welcoming the occupying forces, with Germans rescuing civilians who'd been abandoned by the French government after its surrender. This was all propaganda, as the mysterious photos showed. The first picture was taken on June 30th, 1940, and shows a propaganda poster. In the image, a man in uniform is shown with 2 toddlers. It's joined by a message that reads, "Abandoned populations, trust the German soldier." It was very clear the Parisian stroller did not follow this message. Many of the photographs had messages written on the reverse. The messages were sarcastic and referred to the German soldiers as Fritzes, or our protectors. One read, "After 10 months of occupation, there are still Fritzes who don't know Paris." Another from September of 1940 captured 3 German soldiers, with one looking in the direction of the camera. The caption read, quote, "Look at the kindly face of the gentleman on the left. Monsieur does not wish to be photographed." All the captions were written in block capitals, possibly to disguise the handwriting. Even though the photographer seems to have gotten very close to his subjects, none of them are posing. None of them knew they were being photographed. these weren't the images of someone who'd gotten permission to take them. What made the collection even stranger was just how far the photographer seemed to have traveled. Even though the introductory note described him as a stroller, this wasn't the work of someone casually walking around Paris taking photos. The mysterious photographer went to specific locations of importance, such as train stations and hotels where German authorities had made their headquarters. He photographed propaganda posters and noted, quote, "It takes a lot of patience to find 3 intact posters," presumably because Parisians often tore down the images. The photographer put considerable effort into capturing what day-to-day life was like for people living in the occupied city. Stephanie contacted the Le Monde newspaper for assistance identifying the photographer, and a 4-year investigation to get to the bottom of the mystery began. The first clue came when a similar collection was found at the Museum of the National Resistance. At first, they hoped that the person who donated these photos might have an answer, but he'd found them in his father's belongings after he had passed away. Another collection came from a woman who worked at a department store and had passed the collection on to her son. He also couldn't provide more information. But it would be the department store that finally unraveled the mystery. The store was founded in the 1800s and was still open during the war and occupation. An archivist for the store was going through old newsletters from the 1960s when he came across a striking image. It showed German troops using horses to pull cannons through the city. The same photo was part of the mysterious collection. Crucially, it included a caption indicating it had been taken by, quote, "our very own Raoul Minot." Raoul Minot was born in 1897 and served in the French forces during World War I. He began working as a salesman at the department store after the war and was eventually promoted to manager of the store. He continued to work there during the Second World War, along with his wife, Martha. The store had a photography studio, which gave the Minots access to photography paper, which was rationed at the time. Both Raoul and Martha contributed to the collection. They used small Kodak cameras, which they could hide within their coats. The store became a refuge for resistance forces, and the Minots shared the photos with them. But there were some who worked at the department store who welcomed the occupying forces. Raoul told people he'd been given permission from the authorities to take the pictures. For 2 years, this lie worked. But in early 1943, the police received a letter from an anonymous source. It instructed them to look at a couple working at the department store, as they were taking photos and developing them in the store. Raoul and Martha were discovered and arrested. They were both interrogated, and Raoul was deported. After the war, Martha was left with a mystery of her own. Raoul did not return home, and trying to find out what happened to him would have seemed like an impossible task. Martha rose to the challenge, discovering that he'd been sent to Germany. After the Normandy landings, he was marched to Eastern Europe. He somehow managed to survive the ordeal, but passed away in a US military hospital in Cham, Germany. Raoul has now officially been recognized by the French government as a resistant, which is a high national honor in France. Today, the only mystery that remains is who wrote the introductory note at the beginning of the album. It was signed with only initials, which are hard to decipher. The person may never have known Raoul's name and only collected the photos after they arrived in London. But they helped to preserve this important piece of history, and the message to have the courage to look at the photos is an important one to follow. Adam Levine is best known as the singer of the popular pop rock band Maroon 5. Though he's gained further recognition for his role as a vocal coach on the TV singing contest called The Voice. In 2014, he married Namibian model Behati Prinsloo, and that same year, Maroon 5 recorded a song, It Was Always You, which is widely considered to be about her. The lyrics tell the tale of a man who's good friends with a woman, and who eventually realizes that she's the one that he's meant to be with, having been there the entire time. But in 2022, Levine became embroiled in a scandal that left many of the band's fans shocked. It all started with a TikTok video that was posted by Instagram model Sumner Stroh, in which she revealed that she and Levine had at one point had an affair that lasted about a year. To prove that she was being truthful, she included screenshots of conversations that they'd had in their Instagram DMs and pointed out that after the affair was over, he continued to message her. She added that she originally had no intention of revealing the affair, But after one of her friends got a hold of the screenshots, they threatened to sell them to a tabloid outlet, and Stroh felt forced to share them online. Levine immediately denied the allegations against him, stating he'd never had an affair with anyone. But several more women came forward with proof that he'd also messaged them with flirtatious intentions. Some of these messages were also posted to TikTok. In one message, Levine admits that he shouldn't have been talking to the woman in question, though she's since deleted the video from the platform. But she did state that she had a lot more proof that Levine had flirted with her while his wife was pregnant, but she chose not to share them, stating she didn't feel comfortable revealing everything that was said between her and the singer. She also added that if anyone else was in the same position, they should come forward so that Levine's true nature could be revealed, since she felt sorry for his wife, who was none the wiser. Stroh further claimed that she was manipulated by Levine into carrying on the affair, since she was still young and naive at the time, and that she was now embarrassed to have been involved with him, since he'd shown a lack of respect and remorse when his misdeeds were brought to light. Furthermore, she shared that Levine contacted her months after the affair had ended, stating that he and his wife were expecting a baby, and that if it was a boy, he was considering naming the child Sumner after her. Levine eventually relented and released a statement in which he claimed he'd never had an affair, but that he had crossed a line with several women during a regrettable time in his life. He admitted to acting inappropriately, but assured his fans that he'd started taking steps to rectify his behavior, and that he'd never jeopardize his relationship with his wife and children ever again. There was a time when Woo In-hee was one of the most famous women in North Korea. But today, just watching a television drama about her life can lead to punishment in the Hermit Kingdom. But efforts to erase her from existence have failed, and at least one photograph of this mysterious person survives. North Korea has been almost entirely closed off from the outside world since the end of the Korean War. Information about what actually goes on inside the nation comes mostly from defectors who have managed to escape, or from espionage from South Korea and Japan. Information about any individual citizen, with the exception of high-ranking officials, is almost non-existent. Strangely, one North Korean industry that's relatively well known is the film industry. There are many stories about outsiders being brought into the country to produce and star in films, often for propaganda purposes. A few of these came willingly, but most were kidnapped from their home countries and forced to make the films against their will. One of these was Shin Sang-uk, a South Korean filmmaker who was abducted in 1978 on the orders of Kim Jong-il. Shin and his wife were held captive in North Korea for 8 years, during which time they witnessed the tragedy of Woo In-hee. When they finally made their escape in 1986, Shin smuggled out a photo of the actress and told her story to the rest of the world. When exactly In-hee was born is a mystery, but it's believed to be during the late 1930s or 40s. She was born into a typical Korean family in Kaesong, which is today close to the border with South Korea. Not much about her early life was preserved. She enjoyed dancing, but most of her time was spent working for her family. She continued to work to support them during the Korean War, even as the place where she lived came to be one of the battlegrounds in the conflict. Despite the devastation that was going on around her, In-hee managed to survive and to keep good spirits. After the war, she traveled to Pyongyang to pursue a career in dancing. Her charm and good looks gathered a lot of attention, and she soon took steps into acting. Just a year after she first arrived in the nation's capital, she earned the starring role in The Tale of Chongyang, an adaptation of a classic Korean love story. In-hee's career went from strength to strength, and she was even permitted to travel to Czechoslovakia to study acting. Czechoslovakia was a communist country at the time, but it was still extremely uncommon for anybody but the highest officials to leave North Korea. This was a huge act of faith in In-hee, and the young actress rewarded that faith by returning home after her studies. In-hee was given the title of the People's Actress and became one of the most famous people in the country. North Korea only had one television channel, so there was a good chance that anybody who owned a television set in the nation had at least seen one of her performances. In-hee married film director Yoo Ho-sun after returning from her trip abroad. He was a celebrated filmmaker, and the two were one of the star couples of the nation. But during their marriage, In-hee had many extramarital relationships. It's not clear how many of these were known to Yoo Ho-sun, but this would generally have been frowned upon in the wider community. Many of these relationships were with other workers in her industry. Rumors of her affairs would quickly spread, and in the late 1970s, she was confronted by her coworkers in a mutual criticism session, an event similar to the struggle sessions which took place in Maoist China. En-hee defended herself, pointing out that many of her accusers were the people she was having affairs with. She claimed that they were often the ones to start the relationships, putting the blame on them for the incidents. Even with this defense, En-hee's reputation was ruined. She stopped getting acting roles and was made to work in the film studio's boiler room instead. But suddenly, in 1979, she was permitted to return to acting, and even had some leading roles. It's likely no coincidence that this was around the time that her relationship with Kim Jong-il began. Kim was then the second most powerful person in the country, only after his father. He was officially married to a woman named Kim Yong-suk, and they had a child together, but their marriage was nothing more than an official relationship. According to Kim Jong-il's sister-in-law, there wasn't even anything on paper signifying Yong-suk as his wife. He had many other relationships. Some of these were publicly known, but Kim generally liked to keep his personal life private. So even though he engaged in an affair with one of the most famous people in the nation, he wanted to keep this a secret. He swore En-hee to secrecy and hired another actor to follow her around to make sure she didn't reveal the truth. At some point in 1980, En-hee started another relationship with an unnamed Zainichi Korean, who'd moved to the country for work. En-hee was apparently in love with this man, but knew she had to keep this relationship a secret, more than any other she'd had up to that point. She would spend hours driving around in the man's Mercedes to spend time together. But in the winter of 1980, the relationship came to a tragic end. The Mercedes was found parked with the windows up and the engine running. Both En-hee and her partner were suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning. The man passed away at the scene, but En-hee was rushed to the hospital. While still under the influence of the gas, En-hee was interviewed by the police. During the interview, En-hee mentioned Kim Jong-il. Some versions of the story simply say she asked to speak to him, while others say that she was scared that he'd tried to take her life to stop her from revealing their affair. Unfortunately, En-hee said too much about the powerful figure, and it would cost her her life. En-hee's life was taken in 1981 in front of an audience of 6,000 people. This included her husband, Yoo Ho-san, who was then forced to go back to work on the propaganda film Unsung Heroes. All witnesses were ordered not to speak about what they had seen, but it wasn't long before news of the tragedy became widespread in the country. In an effort to erase En-hee's memory, all footage of the actress was destroyed. Her scenes were cut from the films she'd been in, and images were removed from magazines and pamphlets about the movies. Some films were reshot with different actresses, while others were simply released with large pieces missing, making the plots impossible to follow. En-hee's memory was preserved by Shin Sang-ok smuggling an image of her out of the country. The photo is a still from The Tale of Chongyang, the first movie she starred in. After this was released, other photos believed to be of En-hee emerged. These came from Japanese programs about North Korean films, but it's not certain if these photos definitely depict the actress. The earliest recorded publication of Goosey Goosey Gander, another seemingly meaningless ode, came through Gammer Gurton's Garland, published in London in 1784, although it may be much older. Unlike most of the other dark nursery rhymes, this one instantly takes on a sinister twist at the end, implying some pretty rough consequences for disobedience. The original rhyme was, "Goosey goosey gander, whither shall I wander? Upstairs and downstairs and in my lady's chamber. There I met an old man who wouldn't say his prayers, so I took him by his left leg and threw him down the stairs." It's immediately obvious that this children's song has something dark lurking within, but no one could prepare us for the sinister plot behind it. Given the opening lyrics of the rhyme, many illustrations depicted geese wandering around their goose coop, but this was an incorrect interpretation. Instead, the backstory to this ditty is far more troubling, considering an additional 4 lines that were added sometime later. Those added lyrics were, quote, "The stairs went crack, he nearly broke his back, and the little ducks went quack, quack, quack." The disturbing backstory to this unsettling rhyme is believed to stem from the Reformation in Tudor England, which led to the persecution of Catholic priests. In the early Protestant times, these priests had become endangered. Culling of Roman Catholics became a norm following the Civil War and the crowning of Oliver Cromwell. Should a clergy be captured, they'd be subjected to horrendous forms of torture before meeting an unsightly end, often by being hanged upside down and quartered. Most priests during this period had been at the behest of rich families and had sought to protect them from the Protestant regimes. In an effort to combat this, while still practicing their faith, tiny cupboard-like structures were secretly installed in their homes. They were called priest holes. The regimes ordered that the Catholic priests renounce their Latin prayers and conform to the newly established Book of Common Prayer, which had been written in English. The priest holes served as a hiding place that not only allowed the men of faith to say their secret prayers, but also to keep out of sight from soldiers who were doing the rounds in search of them. But not every single religious figure had a priest hole in their home, and they would often stow away in their ladies' chamber. With the Protestant regime and massacre of priests in mind, the rhyme begins to make a bit more sense. It implies that the singer is one of the soldiers under the reign of Cromwell. He searches upstairs and downstairs for the priest, and even in the ladies' chamber. Supposedly, the clergyman was hiding in his wife's chamber where the soldier captured him. When the cleric refused to conform to the English prayer, his captor grabbed him and threw him down the stairs. With the additional lyrics added on, we learn how the non-conforming religious man almost lost his life being tossed down the stairs, and most likely did later on, which was not included in the final rendition. Historians and scholars also believe that the composition of the song may have been inspired by or led to the creation of another song sung by children who had the barbarous habit of capturing crane flies and pulling off their legs. The little tune they sang was "Old Father Longlegs Can't Say His Prayers," take him by the left leg and throw him down the stairs. The 18th century was clearly not the best time to be coming up with nursery rhymes. The first camera was invented in 1816. By the time the United States Civil War was beginning less than 50 years later, photography was just hitting its stride and becoming something most citizens had access to. The camera provided never-before-available insight into what the war was actually like, and it was during the Civil War that some of the earliest photographic mysteries originated. There had been photos of other wars before the US Civil War. Photographs from the Crimean War and the Mexican-American War still exist today. But technology still had some way to go before it could provide the shocking and disturbing images that were seen during the Civil War. It was during the 4-year conflict that photojournalism was invented. Most of the photographs from the Civil War were taken at camps or more relaxed settings, but over 100 photos taken of battlefields exist. The first photos of actual combat were taken during the war when both the Confederates and the Union photographers captured images of fighting at Charleston Harbor in 1863. Most of these photographs were advertised in sales catalogs, allowing people to purchase photographs of their loved ones or anything else that had been captured. Over 150 years have passed since the conflict. While photos that were purchased at the time may have been cherished by those who bought them, they would often end up in forgotten photo albums, only to be found decades later. Over time, the identities of the people in the photos were forgotten, and even factors like where the images were taken were lost to history. Complicating matters even further, Civil War photographs became a collector's item in the 20th century. People would buy images of individuals and scenes they had no connection to, sometimes getting them from people who also had no connection to the people photographed. Some images would have writing on the back, which provided details of who the person in the image was, but this wasn't always the case. Collectors would soon find themselves with countless images of anonymous individuals and no way of identifying them. In recent years, there's been a push to try to identify the people in these photos. Museums have purchased collections and tried to identify features that could help put a name to the mysterious individuals. Certain insignia can help to determine the regiments that soldiers served in, which significantly narrows down the possible identity of the men in the photos. Websites such as Civil War Photo Sleuth use AI to try to find identities of mysterious figures captured in these photos. By combining information that the owner already knows about the photo, details like insignia and facial recognition technology, the website tries to match images with already identified photos from the period. The website has been able to identify figures in thousands of photographs already, and with every person identified, more information is added to the database to help bring the names of other anonymous individuals. But there are some Civil War photo mysteries which can't be solved by using such a website. Museums that have collections of these anonymous photographs have turned to the public to try to find the stories behind the images that have been captured. Most of these photos are of soldiers, but this isn't always the case. In 2012, the Museum of the Confederacy appealed for help identifying the people in some of its collections, including 2 photographs of little girls taken over 150 years earlier. The most mysterious of these was found by Private Thomas W. Timberlake, a Confederate soldier of the 2nd Virginia Infantry. It was found after the Battle of Port Republic. This fight took place in June of 1862 and was part of General Stonewall Jackson's campaign through the Shenandoah Valley. Of the roughly 9,500 people who fought in the battle, 1,818 lost their lives. It was one of the most costly battles of the campaign for Jackson, who lost 816 men, but it was a victory for the Confederates. After the fighting, Private Timberlake went onto the battlefield. It wasn't uncommon for soldiers to collect the personal possessions of their fallen comrades, which would then be sent home to their families. This didn't always happen though, which meant many families would never find out what happened to their loved ones. One of the items Timberlake collected was a small photograph of a young girl. The photo was found between the bodies of 2 soldiers. One was a Confederate soldier, the other fought for the Union. Timberlake had no way of knowing which of the 2 men the photo belonged to. It was also unlikely he knew the identity of the Union soldier. If he knew the Confederate soldier, the name wasn't recorded. The photograph is an ambrotype, a type of photograph that was popular due to its relatively low cost. The image was of a young girl posing on a chair, her hair in ringlets. Someone had colored her cheeks in a faint pink, which wasn't uncommon at the time. The girl is wearing 2 bracelets and a distinctive necklace, which could help to identify her if the family kept the jewelry after the photo was taken. It's impossible to say whether the girl was a child of the soldier who owned the photograph or some other relative. Even though she's no longer alive today, there may be another photograph of this girl in a family photo album somewhere in the US. But as time passes, it becomes more and more unlikely that this mystery will ever be solved. Upon first listen, the song entitled The Way by the band Fastball seems almost carefree, as it contains lyrics such as eternal summer slacking and they drank up the wine and they got to talking. But in reality, it's about a real-life event that ended in tragedy. The song was released in 1998, and it helped the band become known in the music industry after struggling to find success following their formation 6 years earlier. Their first album, entitled Make Your Mama Proud, failed to make an impression, but they soon started working on a follow-up. The band's members, Tony Scalzo, Miles Zuniga, and Joey Sheffield, had learned from their mistakes on the first release, and they decided to depart from their initial punk sound and started focusing on a more pop-inspired sound instead. By all accounts, it was a great idea, but it left the group's frontman, Scalzo, in a difficult situation since he wasn't accustomed to writing lyrics for pop songs. He knew that the Beatles sometimes took inspiration from newspaper articles, and he decided to give that technique a try. He found an article about a Texas couple who'd gone missing and immediately knew that he'd found what he was looking for. He read that the couple's children were desperate to find them, and he used these facts to create his own narrative. The lyrics in the song suggest that the elderly couple, who were later revealed to be Layla and Raymond Howard, had decided to disappear on purpose as they'd grown tired of society and wanted to start a new life somewhere else. 2 weeks after the article was published, though, it was revealed that Layla and Raymond had been found deceased, and the rest of the tale then came to light. It was revealed that they'd traveled from their hometown of Salado in Texas to Temple, where they attended a day festival. They had attended the festival many times in the past, and hence declined to have their son drive them there, despite his concerns being made clear. They insisted that they knew the way there, and so left without further argument. His concerns were completely justified, though, as both Layla and Raymond had started showing signs of mental instability. When they didn't return home as planned, their son became concerned and he reported them missing. An Arkansas deputy reported that he'd pulled Layla over after he spotted her driving at night with her car's headlights turned off. They'd somehow driven 500 miles in the wrong direction, and the deputy gave them directions back to Salado. 30 minutes later, the couple stopped again as Layla was driving with her high beams on, but they were let off with a warning. Neither of the deputies involved knew about the missing person report and assumed they'd simply gotten lost. A huge search effort followed, and areas as far away as 1,000 miles from Salado were searched. On the 12th of July that year, they were found by a group of hikers at the bottom of a 25-foot cliff just outside of Hot Springs, Arkansas. Raymond was still seated in the passenger seat, but Layla was found about 20 feet away, still holding her purse and keys to the car. The area was investigated, and it was found that Layla never braked before driving off the cliff, and the couple was traveling at speeds of around 50 miles per hour at the time. The Fastball album All the Pain Money Can Buy was released the following year, and it contained the song The Way, which has forever immortalized Layla and Raymond and the tragedy that befell them while they were enjoying their last road trip together. These are the last photographs of Travis Alexander in his final moments alive. The crime scene shows Travis caught on camera with a serious expression. In other photos, his back is turned. Although these photos look normal at first, they have a creepy backstory that's become one of the most truly infamous crime cases in recent history. Travis and Jody met sometime in 2006 at a company convention in Las Vegas. Travis, a salesman, and Jody, a freelance photographer, began a long-distance relationship that soon faltered. In 2007, they split up and Jody reportedly became obsessive over Travis. Travis's friends thought she was a very intense and creepy person. They remember being told unusual stories of how she followed Travis in unexpected ways, like getting into his social media accounts, slashing his tires, and even creeping out the women that he dated. Texts and emails from May of 2008 indicated that the pair had a major argument in which Travis called Jody a sociopath. On June 4th, 2008, Jody drove to Travis's house in Arizona. The pair had an intimate encounter and then showered. During this time, Jody ended his life in a terrible and unexpected way. For reasons unknown, she documented the entire horrifying final encounter with Travis's digital camera, which police discovered 5 days later in Travis's washing machine. Although the camera was physically damaged, the photos contained plenty of crime scene evidence for investigators to later recover. The time-stamped images helped get her sentenced to life in prison. Though her story changed multiple times and even at one point insisted that the true killers were literal ninjas, these creepy images Jody took of Travis led to the solving of this real-life horror mystery. American Sniper is a 2014 film that was directed by the famous actor Clint Eastwood. It's based on the memoir of the same name by Chris Kyle, who was one of the foremost marksmen in the US military during his service. The film follows Kyle's life from the time when he was still a child growing up in Texas. There, his father taught him how to properly handle a firearm, and as an adult, he became a rodeo cowboy and ranch hand. His life takes a negative turn when he arrives home early one day and discovers that his girlfriend has been cheating on him. He decides to leave his old life behind when he sees a news story about the US Embassy being attacked in 1998 and joins the US Navy. It soon becomes apparent that he has exceptional skill, and before long, he becomes a sniper with the Navy SEALs. Later, he proves himself to be so effective at this task that he's given the moniker Legend. Once he returns home, he finds himself longing for his life in the military, despite being married to a woman named Taya and now having a son. He leaves home for his second tour in Iraq, where he continues to display his now impressive marksmanship. But each time he returns home, he grows more distant from his growing family. When a mission during his fourth tour goes wrong, he calls Taya, who now has serious doubts that their relationship will last, and tells her that he's ready to come home for good. Upon his return, he struggles to adapt to normal life, but with the help of a psychiatrist, he manages to do so. Unfortunately, his life was ended in 2013 along with that of his friend Chad Littlefield, by a veteran who was suffering from PTSD and who believed that they were plotting to end his life while they were at a shooting range. After its release, the film was well received, and it did well at the box office, but many people had complaints about how it was presented. They felt there was not enough context given about the battles that Kyle was involved in, and that it doesn't properly depict the horrors of war. It also drew criticism from other actors, with some stating that the movie feels like a World War II propaganda film, and Michael Moore, the controversial director, stated that he was brought up with the belief that snipers aren't heroes, but cowards. But some critics stated that the film was always meant to create controversy, since such movies are more likely to win Oscar awards. David Edelstein from the New York Magazine stated that Eastwood made a serious mistake in the way he framed the context of the film, and that this did a disservice to the men and women fighting for their lives in foreign countries, and even more so to those who lost their lives while fighting for their country. This seemingly normal photo from 1978 has a very creepy backstory you'll never believe is true. On one side is Rosalind Carter, First Lady of President Jimmy Carter, and opposite of her is the notorious individual known as the infamous John Wayne Gacy, one of the most evil serial killers in history. In this photo, Gacy's lapel bears the letter S for security clearance. This means a man who was a literal killer clown had somehow passed a background check and was allowed to be photographed with the president's wife. Of course, neither Rosalind nor the Secret Service knew the truth about the dark history behind John Wayne Gacy, an individual who, as far as they knew, was a great community leader, chosen to head the celebration in Chicago. The event that brought these two together was the Polish Constitution Day, a famous Chicago celebration of Poland's constitution in 1791. Every year there was a large parade event in the city, and this year one of the worst serial killers ever was chosen to run it. The backstory of this photograph is creepy because of how normal it sounds up to this point. Gacy had pushed himself within the Democratic political party and used his construction business to clean the offices of politicians for free. Rosalind even autographed the scary picture to John Gacy, best wishes. Less than 1 year later, Gacy had been caught by investigators for taking the lives of at least 33 people. The New York Times made history by running a piece with unsettling headlines, such as "Photograph shows Mrs. Carter with suspect in mass slayings." At the time this unnerving image was caught on camera, Gacy was secretly stashing bodies under his house. On December 21st, 1978, just months after this photo was caught at the event, the serial killer was apprehended and brought into custody. A police interview led to a shocking criminal confession on December 22nd, and he was indicted the following year on April 23rd of 1979. After Gacy was caught and brought to justice, Secret Service agents would only confirm their story that an unusual mistake had accidentally given Gacy undeserved security clearance. Although Rosalind Carter never commented about the infamous individual photographed next to her, it's easy to imagine she was horrified and frightened by the strange but true events that followed. The rather dark backstory makes this one of the most unnerving photographs in all of US political history. Many people name the film Rain Man as their favorite of all time, thanks to the amazing acting performances delivered by Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman. But in the modern era, it's received some criticism, as we've gained a better understanding of autism and the way that it affects the lives of those who've been diagnosed with the condition. Released in 1988, Rain Man is a comedy drama in which a selfish man, Charlie, played by Tom Cruise, is informed that his father has passed away, and he decides to leave most of his estate, which is worth millions of dollars, to his other son, Raymond, who suffers from autism. Up to that point, Charlie had no idea that his father had another son, but he's also unaware that Raymond is a savant with extensive knowledge about a wide range of subjects, though he doesn't often show emotion. He decides to clandestinely remove Raymond from the mental health facility where he's staying, and when it's discovered that he's gone, Charlie offers to return him if half the estate is paid over to him, but Raymond's doctor refuses. Since this plan has failed, he decides to try and get custody of Raymond, which would give him access to his father's fortune. And to do so, they need to travel to Los Angeles, but Raymond refuses to fly. Hence, the pair has no choice but to start a road trip, but their progress is slowed by Raymond's need to stick to his strict schedule. He refuses to travel on the interstate or whenever it's raining. He insists on watching his favorite TV shows when they're on, and refuses to stay awake after 11 p.m. As the trip progresses, Charlie is increasingly impressed by Raymond's abilities. He then realizes that he knew Raymond as a child, but always believed him to be his imaginary friend, whom he called Rain Man, since he couldn't pronounce his name correctly. It then comes to light that Raymond was sent to the facility after he saved Charlie from a tub full of hot water, but in the wake of the incident, Raymond was blamed, and unable to explain what had happened, he was sent away. By this time, Charlie is in financial ruin, and he decides to take advantage of Raymond's abilities. They travel to Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, where Raymond counts cards while playing blackjack. The scheme is successful, and Charlie is able to pay off his debts after they win $86,000. When they return to Los Angeles, Raymond's doctor appears and offers Charlie $250,000 to return Raymond to him. But the pair has now formed a close bond, and he refuses the offer. In the end, Raymond returns to the facility anyway, and Charlie promises to visit him as often as he can. Hoffman was praised for his portrayal of Raymond after the film was released, and the movie would become the highest-grossing box office film of 1988. It would go on to win many awards, but in the last few years it's been thrust back into the spotlight for negative reasons. Many people feel that it misrepresented autism, since it created the belief that people who've been diagnosed with the condition are incapable of showing affection, and in many cases, diagnoses have been botched because of this misconception. One man revealed that when he started suspecting that his young daughter may be autistic, he was told by a doctor that girls can't be affected by autism, and that it's a condition that only affects men. He added that she didn't act like, quote, the guy from Rain Man, further proving that the film may have been responsible for a certain amount of misinformation regarding autism. Since the mid-1700s, the Seminole people of Florida have spoken about a creature they called Tall Man, also known as skunk ape, a term that was coined back in the 1960s. When residential construction began in the area in the 1970s, more sightings of the creature were reported. Most of those in the Palm Beach area, described as being around 7 feet tall, with reddish-brown hair and weighing an estimated 400 to 500 pounds. The skunk ape is said to smell strongly of a wet dog, a skunk, rotten eggs, or any combination of the three. The very first published report of a skunk ape sighting occurred in Sewanee County, east of Tallahassee in 1942. A man reported that he was driving down the road when the creature jumped out onto the running board of his car. He claimed that the creature clung to the side of his vehicle for half a mile before jumping off and running back into the woods. Another sighting in 1957 came from 3 men that were hunting in the Big Cypress National Reserve east of Naples, nearly 400 miles away from the first sighting. All 3 men reported that the skunk ape invaded their campsite, and since then, there have been hundreds more sightings of the creature. Dave Shealy, owner of the Skunk Ape Research Center, says that he saw one of the creatures for the first time when he was 9 years old. His father had found a set of massive footprints not too long before, and on this day, Dave's brother spotted it first while they were hunting in the area. He describes that the creature looked like a man, but was completely covered with hair. On the 9th of January, 1974, Richard Lee Smith reported to police that he'd struck something with his car while driving near the intersection of US Route 27. He thought at first that he'd hit a tall man wearing dark clothing, but to his surprise, a 7-foot hairy creature stood up, roared at him, and charged his vehicle. He immediately took off, but for the next few hours, reports came in of sightings of a limping giant walking along Route 27. Police investigated, and the patrolman reported seeing a hairy creature limping along the road before disappearing into the brush. But sightings still occur today. In 2000, an anonymous letter was mailed to Sarasota's Sheriff's Department, containing 2 creepy photographs of what the sender believed to be an escaped orangutan, that had stolen apples from their porch. When the photo was inspected more closely, it was found to depict a primate that looked nothing like an orangutan, but something much more akin to the skunk ape. Despite its name, Origins and Lemons is only mentioned once in the nursery rhyme, and that's at the very beginning. Though you'd expect the rest of the song to keep the same theme, it doesn't. No other fruit is mentioned thereafter, only ramblings about bells and obscure places. The traditional English folk song is believed to have first appeared in print in 1744, after which it evolved into a singing game, played similarly to London Bridge is Falling Down. The only alteration is that once all the players have been caught, a game of tug-of-war ensues. The lyrics went, quote, "Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. You owe me 5 farthings, say the bells of St. Martin's. When will you pay me? Say the bells of Old Bailey. When I grow rich, say the bells at Shoreditch. When will that be? Say the bells of Stepney. I do not know, says the great bell at Bow. Here comes a candle to light you to bed, and here comes a chopper to chop off your head." At first, the rhyme seems like another random children's ditty, where a conversation is taking place between several bells from different churches. But then we're met with an unexpected and dark lyric, one that speaks of desolation. And suddenly, the children's nursery rhyme becomes something truly sinister, only to be made all the more dark by its disturbing backstory. It's believed that this children-friendly nursery rhyme has actually emerged from the Tyburn gallows, following one convicted man's route to execution. Each of the places named in the lyrics, St. Clement's, St. Martin's, Stepney, and Bow, each refer to a church, with Clement's being located on East Cheap in London, Martin's being a medieval church with which moneylenders are associated, Stepney serving as the oldest church in London, and Bow being St. Mary le Bow. Of course, the bells belonging to these churches aren't really saying anything, but they're sounding their chimes, as so heard by the convicted man who sits in the darkness of the closed wagon transporting him to his doom. It travels through London, making its way to the cells, in which the inmate will be kept, and finally to the public execution block. So what about Old Bailey? Old Bailey is referring to a famous medieval courthouse, further supporting the fact that the song relates to a felon. Researching further into this idea allowed historians and scholars to dissect the meaning of oranges and lemons, suggesting that the fruits may be referencing the unfortunate victims who are awaiting execution. That foreboding candlelight that appears at the end of the nursery rhyme refers to the bellman of Saint Sepulchre, who appears outside of the cells at nights and informs the inmates that their time has come. By the following day, they would meet an unfortunate end, with the chopper that comes to chop off their heads. In this black and white vintage photo, a man stands among a lush field of corn. Many stalks are taller than him, and hidden in the background, viewers can see more plants and what looks like a tropical forest. The caption on the photo reads, quote, "Publicity photo of Jim Jones standing in corn growing in Jonestown." Despite the fact that it happened nearly 50 years ago, Americans still know Jones's name and what happened at his doomed commune. The Jonestown Massacre residents remain one of the scariest stories in American history. Yet in this creepy promotional photo, taken sometime between 1976 and 1978, Jones was attempting to market a utopia. Despite the idyllic appearance on the surface, Jones's group was no longer a utopian movement. It was a frightening cult. In the mid-1950s, Jim Jones opened his first church in Indianapolis. By 1970, Jones and his People's Temple had amassed thousands of followers who were drawn to him due to his message of peace and humanitarianism, as well as his reported displays of mind reading and faith healing. The People's Temple was also racially integrated, which was noteworthy for the time period. Members of the church felt that they were part of a family rather than a congregation. Despite the humanism that Jones preached, members of his church were treated quite poorly and subjected to real-life horror stories of prolonged isolation and even having large snakes wrapped around their necks. In the 1970s, Jones and hundreds of members of his congregation decided to move to the small nation of Guyana, where he promised he would build Jonestown, a socialist utopia in the jungle. Life in Jonestown involved long days in the fields in order to sustain their community. Residents had their passports confiscated, and their letters home were censored. An increasingly paranoid Jones encouraged them to inform upon one another and required everyone to attend lengthy late-night meetings where they participated in faith-based ceremonies. This included drinking substances that they were told would end their lives but never did. It was just a test. In 1978, a US congressman named Leo Ryan traveled to Jonestown to investigate various allegations. Several of the People's Temple members asked Congressman Ryan to help them escape. Fearing for the sanctity of this settlement, Jones ordered the congressman and his companions to be done away with. After this, Jim Jones commanded all of Jonestown's residents to gather in the main pavilion to commit a revolutionary act. The citizens, some of them believing this was another faith-based drill, lined up to drink a poison-laced fruit juice concoction. The following day, when Guyanese authorities arrived at the compound, they found bodies. Some of them had their arms wrapped around each other. Fewer than 100 residents of Jonestown had survived, and those that did escape had hidden in the jungle. The socialist utopia Jim Jones had been so eager to portray in his creepy photos had completely failed, taking hundreds of innocent lives with it. Pat Travers made a name for himself in the music industry during the 1970s, thanks to his high-energy live performances, bluesy vocals, and his ability on guitar. His first major breakthrough came in 1970, when he released the live album called Live, Go For What You Know, which contained a cover of a song by Stan Lewis. This song has since caused quite a bit of controversy, as people started realizing the true meaning behind it, and there's no doubt that if it were released today, it would cause even more of a stir. Nevertheless, Travers and his group of musicians have remained as popular as ever, as they continue to tour and deliver what many people have described as some of the best live performances they've ever seen. He started playing the guitar when he was 14 years old, and after attending a Jimi Hendrix concert, he was inspired to pursue music as a career. He joined several bands while still a teenager, and together they played in clubs across Quebec. He caught the eye of rocker Ronnie Hawkins, who invited Travers to go on tour with him as his lead guitarist, but after a year on the road, he decided to start playing his own music and relocated to London. Once there, he recorded his first demo, and this led to his first recording contract with Polydor Records. He released his debut album, Pat Travers, in 1976, and then embarked on a tour of England, setting in motion a successful career that would last for decades to come. Before long, he was considered by many of his fans as a guitar hero, and he started accumulating a massive fan base. But in modern times, many people have questioned his decision to cover the Stan Lewis song Boom Boom Out Go the Lights, due to the subject matter of the lyrics. The track was written by Lewis and recorded by another harmonica player, Little Walter, in 1957, and at the time, no one seemed to notice that it was about spousal abuse. Some people believed it was about the lights being switched on and off during a concert in a stadium, but the truth is far darker. The very first verse in the song reads, "No kiddin', I'm ready to fight. I've been looking for my baby all night. If I get her in my sight, boom, right here, out go the lights." This makes it pretty obvious what the song is about, and one wonders how this could have ever been misconstrued as being about anything else. What makes matters worse is the reason why the writer of the lyrics is looking to do this. In the third verse, it's revealed that the woman in question wanted out of the relationship that she was in, and this made the man in question madder than he's ever been in his life, which somehow prompted him to look for her so that he could assault her until she lost consciousness, hence the part that reads, "Out go the lights." While these lyrics may not have caused much of a fuss back in the 70s, they've come under fire in modern times for being misogynistic and promoting violence against women. Queen's House, located in Greenwich, England, was built between 1616 and 1619. Its history covers a number of female royals, including Anne of Denmark, the wife of King James I, as well as Queen Henrietta Maria, wife of King Charles I. The home is especially known today for its stunning spiral staircase, the first of its kind to be built into a wall and is supported by a central pole. But the staircase is not what's so creepy about this historical photo from 1966. Hidden in the background of this image is a ghost caught on camera in a scary photo that seems like it shouldn't exist. As the disturbing backstory goes, a retired clergyman named Ralph Hardy was visiting the Queen's house when he took a mysterious photo of the famous staircase, as many visitors have done before. When Reverend Hardy had the photo developed, he was shocked to discover a ghostly figure at the center of the creepy image. The photo clearly shows the staircase and black railing at the left. At the right of the image, below a blazing light, is a ghostly figure in a white shroud that some say grips the railing with both hands. If the backstory behind this unexplained photo is true, the unnerving image cannot be explained as the staircase itself was cordoned off at the date of Reverend Hardy's visit. In addition, the historical photo itself and the film negative were examined by a number of baffled experts, including official representatives from Kodak. Whether or not this scary photo is real or fake is up for debate, but this picture shouldn't exist unless the paranormal stories are true, and experts have documented this evidence as real. To this day, the Queen's House Museum continues to be the site of paranormal ghost stories. In 2003, a worker was talking to two colleagues when he saw a figure in an old-fashioned gray dress walking across a balcony and passing through a wall. Some say it was the same haunting figure that Reverend Hardy captured on film in 1966. Ring Around the Rosie, once a simple children's song, made its way through the generations, carried orally over several centuries. Its rhyme was basic and simple, and the dance was innocent. Young boys and girls would connect their hands and form a circle. As they pranced around, not breaking their contact, they would chant, "Ring around the Rosie, a pocket full of posies. A tissue, we all fall down." That final line saw an almost unexpected drop to the ground, followed by giggles all around from the group. If only they knew the darkness that loomed over the dainty floral song. In the mid-20th century, scholars began to make a daunting connection between this nursery rhyme and a harrowing 14th century event, the Great Plague of London, an outbreak of the bubonic plague that took the city in its grip in 1665. Supposedly, Ring Around the Rosie was referring to the red inflammation present in the black bubo, a swollen lymph node associated with the bubonic plague. We then have a pocket full of posies, which is believed to have been kept in the pockets of plague sufferers in an effort to mask the sickly smell. The word a tissue, resembling a sneeze, is alleged to be a nod to one of the other symptoms of the bubonic plague. The last lyrics of this innocent children's rhyme, "We all fall down," implies the eventual demise of the sufferers. But the nursery rhyme can't be traced back to a single origin point, and it's believed to have connections to two other areas. Some suggest that their research pointed to the Black Plague of 1347, or an English village called Iam, where people were infected with the plague of 1665. In the case of the 1347 rendition of the short ditty, a tissue becomes ashes, ashes, suggesting that the bodies of the deceased would be cremated, even though burning bodies was banned during the 1300s, and "we all fall down" implies widespread fatalities. With the Iam version, some researchers claim that the children of the village would sing this very non-child-friendly song while dancing around the victims of the bubonic plague. There are several versions of the backstory and origins of the nursery rhyme, each having its own bizarre and disturbing quirks, though each serves as evidence that it corresponds with a plague of sorts. Ring Around the Rosie aligns with both the interpretation of the Great Plague, which featured a black bubo ringed with red inflammation, as well as the Black Plague, which was characterized by a rosy skin rash. Whichever it stemmed from, this flowery little ditty was no cute nursery rhyme, but instead allegedly served as the chant of the damned. Today, there are several variations of the same song, one of which completely replaces both ashes and tissues. James Leeser, one of the first researchers to draw the connection between the plague and Ring Around the Rosie, suggests that only few people would figure out that this nursery rhyme, chanted within the circle of connected children, has origins in the plague, with roses referring to rashes and posies referring to the hidden flowers used to conceal the smell of those who were on the brink of meeting their maker. The Great Plague crippled 15% of Britain's population, allowing We All Fall Down to become all the more relevant. A paranormal mystery is caught on hidden camera in this unnerving image from Bradford, England. A ghost hunting team took a creepy photo at one of the scariest places in the world, the Ballinghall building. One of the scary pictures, if real, is the ghost of a woman dressed in an old maid's outfit. The ghost could not be seen in person or in two other pictures, just this one. Only when they looked at the unnerving images later did she see what was hidden in one of the scary pictures. Ballinghall dates back to the 14th or 15th century as a home for various wealthy families up until the English Civil War. Long ago, a top commander was ready to stop any and all Civil War resistance by destroying the entire town. When he chose the Ballinghall building as his headquarters, the ghost of a woman tugged on his bedsheets and told him to pity poor Bradford. According to the local legend, the commander was too scared to disobey and spared the town because of a ghost. Ballinghall is now a period house and open to the public. Many have their own paranormal mystery experiences, and some have captured their own creepy photos. The maid isn't the only ghost that is said to walk in the halls of Ballinghall. There's also been sightings of a tall man in a black coat and a lady in white who's different from the maid. Perhaps one day more creepy photos of them will emerge to unsettle us all. The Rolling Stones is without a doubt one of the longest existing rock bands of all time. The group, which currently consists of members Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Ronnie Wood, and replacement drummer Steve Jordan, released their first album in 1964 and have been going strong ever since. They've amassed a huge fan base, resulting in millions of albums sold over the years. And surprisingly, they're still touring today, more than 60 years after the band was first formed, and they're still performing in sold-out stadiums. While they were still students in London, Jagger, Richards, Brian Jones, Charlie Watts, and Bill Wyman decided to form a band, and in the early days, their sound was likened to the bluesy type of music that was being played around Chicago at the time. Just 3 years later, they'd already seen a lot of success, and had become just as popular as the Beatles. But the difference between the two bands was easily noticeable, as the Rolling Stones came across as more aggressive and intimidating, and presented an air of rebellion, whereas the Beatles grew ever softer as the years passed by. They were often harassed by the police and media, as rumors of illegal substance abuse abounded, along with their penchant for alcohol, but this had no effect as they refused to change, a factor that only endeared them even further to their fans. They released their first album, containing only original material, named Aftermath in 1966, and it was a massive hit. Their singles Satisfaction and Paint It Black were released in close succession, ensuring the band's status as a powerhouse rock ensemble at the time. By the turn of the decade, the Beatles had decided to call it quits, and the Rolling Stones became the foremost rock band of all time. In the decades that followed, they showed few signs of slowing down, and today they remain one of the most famous musical acts of all time. But one of their songs from the album Aftermath has now been criticized for its lyrics, which have not stood the test of time. The song is entitled Under My Thumb, and while it drew some criticism from feminist groups at the time of its release, many people have now condemned its lyrics, since it tells the story of a woman who's being controlled by her partner. It describes a woman who used to be very pushy and controlling towards her boyfriend, but he manages to flip the script, as is evidenced by lyrics such as It's Down to Me, the difference in the clothes she wears, and Under My Thumb, a girl who has changed her ways. It continues, quote, It's down to me, the way she does just what she's told. The change has come, she's under my thumb. Jagger defended the song, stating it was written as a tongue-in-cheek track, and it was in no way anti-feminist. But critics have stated that it's clear to see that these lyrics no longer have a place in modern society. Point guard Mark Jackson spent his early days as a professional basketball player for the New York Knicks. It wasn't a remarkable year by most metrics, although Jackson, along with Patrick Ewing and Charles Oakley, would transform the Knicks into a major playoff contender in the following years, the 1990 season was just okay. But Jackson's 1990 NBA Hoops basketball car has become something of a commodity in recent years, with professionally graded versions selling for more than $450. The hair-raising reason behind the photo's value remains hidden in the background of the card. If you look past Jackson, on the left-hand side of the image, there are two similar-looking men sitting courtside. Those aren't just any spectators. They've been confirmed to be the famous Mendez brothers, Lyle and Eric. In 1989, the two young men took the lives of their wealthy parents as they watched TV in their Beverly Hills mansion. In their 1996 trial, during which they were found guilty, prosecutors theorized that the brothers had been too impatient to wait for their inheritance, which was to be $14 million in the event that both their mother and father passed together. Lyle and Eric's disturbingly unusual behavior after the crime truly seemed to support this conclusion. Rather than seeming remorseful, the brothers went on lavish spending sprees. Between August of 1989 and when they were apprehended in 1990, they spent about $700,000 on clothes, businesses, watches, and more. Among all the luxury items they bought, seemingly insignificant was a line item for 2 courtside tickets to a New York Knicks game, leading to this creepy photograph. No one knew about the true horror story hidden in this photograph until August 12, 2018, when a Twitter user posted a photo of the card with the caption that jokingly read, quote, "Mood, my Mark Jackson baseball card with cameos from the Menendez brothers in the background." An anonymous user reposted the picture in December of that year, and it quickly went viral, with users buying up the card and speculating whether or not the two scary people pictured were actually the infamous brothers. The timeline fit, and in January of 2019, the haunting photograph became a confirmed sighting. A news outlet managed to get a hold of Lyle Menendez in the San Diego prison, where he is currently incarcerated. He confirmed that the unnerving image pictured him and his brother hidden in the background. Who knows what other untold stories and creepy secrets might be lurking in photos across the world? Perhaps analog materials like this will continue to be used to solve mysteries. The Da Vinci Code is a novel that was written by Dan Brown and released in 2003. Following its massive success, it was made into a film that was released 3 years later, starring Tom Hanks and Audrey Tautou. Upon first being released, it was an instant hit, since it contained suspense, intrigue, secrets, and riddles that needed to be solved. But in modern times, it's come under fire for being historically inaccurate and for offending the Catholic Church. As soon as the book was released, churches started distributing pamphlets among their congregations, as they felt it might cause Christians to start doubting their faith due to the many religious inaccuracies that it contained. When word started to spread that it would be made into a movie, it caused outrage. It was labeled as directly attacking the Christian faith. While most readers saw it for what it was, a work of fiction, leaders of several different churches felt it was too dangerous and that it could be misinterpreted by those who weren't properly informed. One of the main issues with the film is that Opus Dei, a personal prelature within the Catholic Church, is depicted as a shadowy and violent organization that'll stop at nothing to protect the ancient secrets of the Catholic Church. This institution suggested that the film open with a disclaimer, stating that the events depicted should be in no way taken as factually correct. The director, Ron Howard, decided this wasn't necessary. The church also accused the film of further harming its reputation, since it's been involved in several scandals over the years, and it's believed that it would cause mistrust of the church among the public. Some of the events and ideas in the film have upset a lot of viewers and religious leaders. For example, it suggests that the Holy Grail isn't a cup, but Mary Magdalene, who's portrayed as being married to Jesus. After its release, the Da Vinci Code was banned in several countries, and the Vatican threatened to take legal action. It led to protests being held in Greece and parts of the United States, and the National Organization for Albinism and Hypopigmentation felt that the character of Silas, a man with albinism, was too stereotypical. Furthermore, he doesn't make for a good villain, as he's constantly outsmarted, and some viewers have pointed out glaringly obvious plot holes that, if not present, would have made for a much shorter and less entertaining film. Two of the movie's stars, Ian McKellen and Tom Hanks, have also voiced their opinion on some of the film's inaccuracies. McKellen stated that the suggestion that one character, Sophie, is the great-great-great-granddaughter of Jesus struck him as absurd. Hanks has described it as, quote, a hooey, and stated that the puzzles and scavenger hunts it contains are about as accurate to history as the James Bond movies are to espionage. Other inaccuracies include Brown's suggestion that the Louvre Museum in France was constructed using 666 glass panels, when it actually contains 673, and that it contains 65,300 pieces of art, when it actually houses only 35,000, and that Leonardo da Vinci featured androgyny throughout his body of work, a view which art experts have labeled as absurd. The Da Vinci Code was never meant to be read or viewed as a factual account, but since many people, especially those unfamiliar with the Christian faith, may be unfamiliar with the true narrative, it's easy to see why the tale has caused so much controversy, and why it's been branded by many religious leaders as problematic. Anneliese Mitchell of Bavaria, Germany, enrolled in the University of Würzburg in 1973. Hidden within the background story of this seemingly innocent and normal-looking photo is a truly disturbing backstory that will chill you. During her time at university, Anneliese was diagnosed with epilepsy and had begun taking medications to help her condition. Anneliese had several visits to the doctors and neurologists, and experts worked hard to get Anneliese's condition under control so that she could be a normal student like everyone else. But behind this dark and disturbing medical mystery was a strange answer. According to Anneliese, who was not fond of medication or her diagnosis, she was simply possessed. Anneliese came from a strong Catholic family, and her family began to feed into Anneliese's beliefs. Anneliese visited priests for help until she met Ernst Alt, who agreed to perform an exorcism assisted by Arnold Renz. Over the course of 10 months, Arnold and Ernst performed over 67 exorcisms on Anneliese. The most intense sessions could last for up to 4 hours. All the while, Anneliese was restrained. Her behavior became worse and worse as she spewed vile words towards the priest and her family. Many unbelievable moments of inhumane wailing and demonic noises were recorded by the group as evidence. As the exorcisms wore on, Anneliese became weaker and weaker in a paranormal mystery caught on camera. In July of 1976, Anneliese passed away due to dehydration and malnutrition. She weighed just 68 pounds. The ceremonies did nothing to help Anneliese, and those involved were charged with 6 months in jail, which was later reduced to probation. This chilling photograph of Anneliese Mitchell, taken just years before her passing, harbors one of the darkest and most disturbing backstories ever told. Most of us are familiar with the Carl Douglas song Kung Fu Fighting, which was released in 1974. It's been featured in movies, advertisements, and is often played on the radio, but it's since been called inappropriate and has resulted in the arrest of at least one person. Thanks to the song, Douglas became the first ever Jamaican-born musician to make it to the top of the charts in the US. He grew up in California and Jamaica, but relocated to England, where he studied sound engineering before starting his first band, Big Stampede, in 1964. He then moved to Spain, where he started the band The Explosions, but had little success, and eventually decided to move back to England, where he joined a group called Gonzales. He then started working as a session musician for Pi Records, and then worked on the soundtrack for the Richard Roundtree film Embassy, which was produced by singer-songwriter Bidu. Bidu then contacted Douglas again in 1974, when he was searching for a vocalist to perform on the Larry Weiss song, I Want to Give You My Everything. And needing another song to fill the album, the pair quickly finished a song that Douglas had written about the kung fu phase that was sweeping across the world at the time in the aftermath of the Bruce Lee film Enter the Dragon. The result was the song Kung Fu Fighting, which was recorded in just 10 minutes, and at the time neither man could have foreseen that it would become as popular as it did, or that it would later be hailed as insensitive. As the album was released, Kung Fu Fighting shot to the top of the charts in the UK and eventually in the US. It quickly went on to sell 9 million copies around the world. In an effort to cash in further on the track's success, Pi Records released a follow-up called Dance the Kung Fu, but it failed to impress and is widely considered to have been a complete failure. Unfortunately, this caused Douglas to be considered nothing more than a novelty act, but he did go on to see further moderate success. He released the album Love, Peace, and Happiness in 1979, and Keep Pleasing Me 4 years later, but none of the songs made it further than the top 40 in the charts, and eventually Douglas relocated to Germany, where he established a production company, which works with film and advertisements. But in recent times, the song Kung Fu Fighting has been criticized as being racially insensitive, not only because of some of the lyrics, but because it contains a certain melody that's considered insensitive towards Asian people. While most of the song highlights the amazing abilities of Kung Fu fighters, in his naivety, Douglas decided to use a few stereotypical names in the lyrics, including Billy Chin and Sammy Chung, which has drawn criticism from a lot of people. Furthermore, in 2011, a singer called Simon Ledger was performing for Easter Sunday in a pub on the Isle of Wight in England, and during the festivities, he decided to play Kung Fu Fighting, since it's still a popular track. But halfway through his performance, he was approached by a Chinese couple who started yelling at him to stop singing. The couple was asked to leave since they were using foul language in a venue where children were present, but they then contacted the police. Ironically, Ledger was then arrested while having dinner at a Chinese restaurant later on after the complainant accused him of being racially abusive. He was later released after CCTV footage of the incident was reviewed, and nothing untoward was found. But many people still feel that the song should no longer be performed, since it could easily result in more people taking offense. In this weird photo, billionaire financier J.P. Morgan is pictured sitting in a chair in the Senate caucus room. On June 1st, 1933, Morgan had been summoned to testify before a congressional committee in regards to suspicious banking practices. One reporter was determined to cover this story however he could. He remembered seeing an unusual pair in the hallway, a circus performer by the name of Laya Graff and her press agent, and hatched a plan. Laya's agent, seeing the opportunity for notoriety, waited until J.P. Morgan sat down and placed Laya upon his lap. The two were caught on camera chatting politely. Morgan remarked that he had a grandchild bigger than Laya, to which she replied that she was surely older than his grandchild. The photos, which made front pages across the country, were hailed as showing that the greatest banker was only human. This was a major win for J.P. Morgan, who was suffering from bad press as a result of the hearing into his shady dealings. Laya's backstory is far more disturbing, though. 27-inch tall Laya, a young German immigrant in the 1930s, was by all reports shy and sensitive. It's likely that due to her short stature, working with the circus was the only career that was open to her. Laya could tolerate the work as a circus performer, but she did not appreciate the fame that came with her front page photo. 2 years after meeting J.P. Morgan, she was so overwhelmed from the publicity that she returned to her home country. Laya Graff was a stage name. Her real name was Laya Schwartz. She was half Jewish. In 1937, 4 years after she was America's sweetheart, she was arrested in Germany. In 1941, her tragic true story ends with Auschwitz, where she most likely did not survive. Viridiana isn't a film that many people would be familiar with, because it caused quite a stir after it was first screened in 1961, and critics have stated it would never be allowed to be released in modern times. Viridiana is the name of the main character, a nun who's on the verge of taking her final vows. Before doing so, though, she's told to visit her only surviving family member, a recluse uncle called Don Jaime. He lives in a mansion that's on the verge of collapse, along with a single servant called Ramona. While there, Viridiana learns that she and her aunt look uncannily alike, a fact that greatly disturbs Don Jaime. He asks her to put on her aunt's wedding dress, but she refuses, and the next morning she flees to escape his advances. But while waiting for her bus, she's approached by police officers who inform her that her uncle has lost his life. She's returned to the mansion, where she learns that she and an illegitimate son of Don Jaime are to share his estate. She decides to abandon her life as a nun and starts to care for those in need, using the mansion as shelter for the homeless and its outbuildings as kitchens to feed them. Before long, Jorge, the illegitimate son, arrives and starts repairing the ruined buildings. One day, the vagrants living on the property break into the mansion and decide to hold a banquet that turns into a night of debauchery and destruction. The film also contains several more scenes that cannot be discussed here, and hence it drew widespread condemnation soon after its release. They believed that these scenes were intended to cause offense and outrage, which was seen as unacceptable. The central governing body of the Catholic Church in Vatican City, the Holy See, described the film as blasphemous and condemned it as soon as it was released. The Spanish government banned the movie and ordered that the original negative film be destroyed, but since it was in the hands of a foreign company for post-production work, this was never done. The film was only screened in Spain for the first time in 1977, by which time its director, Luis Buñuel, had passed away. Before his passing, he stated he never intended for the movie to be blasphemous, but conceded that he was less qualified to judge the film than Pope John Paul XXII, who condemned it outright. Despite all this controversy, though, Viridiana won the Palme d'Or award, but Buñuel was in Paris and hence couldn't attend the award ceremony. Spain's governmental director of film was persuaded to accept the award on his behalf, giving the impression that the Spanish government had no qualms about the film being released. But this was a mistake, and as soon as Fontan returned to Spain, he was fired from his position. The Vatican took the stance that the film was both anti-Catholic and anti-Christian, since it implied that Christian charity will always fail, and that righteous acts are only a byproduct of more salacious needs. At first glance, it's easy to miss the shackles and handcuffs on these two very scary people. The notoriously infamous Perry Smith and Richard Hickok met in prison in the 1950s, and their meeting would bring about untold chaos across Kansas. Richard and Perry had picked the family of a successful farmer named Herb Clutter. They believed $10,000 was stored at their farmhouse, an amount that's worth over $100,000 in today's dollars. On November 15, 1959, Richard and Perry made their way to Holcomb, Kansas, and readied themselves to burglarize the Clutter home. Little did they know the Clutter family didn't keep any money in the house and paid for everything by check to avoid this very situation. To cover their tracks, they decided to take out the family one by one. By the end of their crime spree, the two had gained just $50 and had left behind 4 victims. It didn't take long for the two to be tracked down and arrested, and they made a full confession to the police. This disturbing backstory behind this creepy photo was on everyone's mind, as the criminals were caught on camera coming out of court. Their criminal smiles are extra eerie, considering they just received a sentence of capital punishment for their crimes. Both Richard and Perry are unfazed by the verdict and are looking at each other across the room. A vintage celebrity photograph taken on March 29, 1995, appears to be a typical picture of a couple talking. But this seemingly normal photo harbors a creepy backstory of a dark and disturbing true crime. Selena Quintanilla was a household name across Latin and Southern America, whose music transcends generations. The mystery woman standing next to her makes this photo creepy. Yolanda Saldivar slowly blended herself into Selena's personal life for years. As head of the Selena fan club, Selena trusted Yolanda, and Selena even made her manager at her exclusive boutique and luxury salon store. The whole time, Yolanda was secretly developing a dark obsession with Selena and found herself hanging on to her every word. Over time, the creepy backstory began to head towards a true crime mystery. Yolanda had been fired by Selena and her team, and had also been told not to contact her, but still she kept trying to get in touch. On March 29, 1995, Selena and her husband, Chris Perez, were snapped in this photo by his father. This would be the last photo ever taken of Selena, and it would remain one of the most unnerving images to her personal fans and family alike. The day after this photo was taken is when the creepy backstory comes to an unexpected ending. Selena met up with Yolanda at a hotel in Corpus Christi, Texas, that would become a true crime scene. Selena had been receiving complaints from her fans that they had not received old merchandise orders that they had paid for. When she reviewed her financial records, she also found money was missing each month from the boutique store. Selena wanted to know the true story. Little did she know that Yolanda had been embezzling $30,000 from the fan club and from her boutique store. As Yolanda pulled a weapon from her purse, Selena tried to run from the hotel, and 3 loud bangs rang out. By the time paramedics arrived, it was too late, and one of Latin America's biggest stars was gone. Yolanda Saldivar is currently serving a life sentence for her crime story, and is up for parole in 2025 at the age of 60. The strange but true story of Cher Ami, the greatest carrier pigeon of World War II, remains a largely untold tale unknown to most. But the creepy backstory behind this mysterious photograph is still dark and disturbing nonetheless. On October 3rd, 1918, 3 battalions of men, numbering around 194, found themselves in a bad position in France's Argonne forest. After battling Germans for days, they now found themselves surrounded on all sides and low on supplies. Major Charles Whittlesey managed to save as many men as he could, but the oncoming German forces substantially outnumbered them. During their retreat, they'd gotten themselves stuck in the hills. There was no way for them to radio the other forces, but there was one tool left. As the bizarre backstory behind this photo goes, Major Whittlesey ordered his men to write a message and attach it to their pigeon. Amazingly, the pigeon made it over enemy lines and into Allied land safely, at least 12 times to provide their location and other communications to the rest of the armed forces. Each successful journey was an unbelievable success against overwhelming odds. On the final run, the pigeon came back with a bad leg and an eye, both of which later needed removal. In an unexpected ending, this bird would become a hero. Within hours of the final message from Cher Ami, the 194 trapped soldiers were back to safety. As a result of this bravery, the creepy pigeon in this dark and disturbing photograph was dubbed Cher Ami, which is French for dear friend. She was also awarded a medal for bravery. The film Breakfast at Tiffany's, which is based on the Truman Capote novella of the same name, was released in 1961. It stars Audrey Hepburn as a New York socialite called Holly Golightly, who lives next door to a writer called Paul Varjak. Before long, Paul finds himself in love with Holly, but her unpredictable nature catches him off guard, since he's far more conservative than she is, and their relationship is made all the more complicated by the fact that Paul is involved with another woman named Emily. Mickey Rooney plays the part of Mr. Yunioshi, the landlord of the building where Holly and Paul live, and it's this character that has caused the film to be viewed in a less than favorable light in modern times. When Holly visits Paul for the first time, he reveals that his writing career is failing, since he hasn't published anything in years. She also notices that he has no ribbon in his typewriter, and later decides to buy him one as a gift. At one point in the film, the pair decides to spend a day together, doing things that they've never done before. Paul decides to end his relationship with Emily, but his relationship with Holly suffers a setback when she learns that her brother has lost his life while serving in the military. She decides to relocate to Brazil, where she plans to marry a Brazilian politician named José da Silva Pereira. But before she can leave, she's arrested in connection with an illegal substance issue. When she's released on bail, Paul arrives in a taxi to pick her up, and he presents her with a letter from Jose in which he ends their relationship. At first, she intends to move to Brazil anyway, but she realizes that she's in love with Paul, and the film ends with the couple kissing in the rain. Soon after its release, the film is praised for its aesthetics, and in the decades that followed, it became a classic, as it reminded viewers of a simpler time when life seemed to be far less complicated. But in modern times, it's been criticized for containing some harmful societal biases that weren't seen as much of a problem back in the 60s, but that are now rightfully considered to be unacceptable. One of the biggest problems is that Mickey Rooney used makeup to make his character appear Japanese. And while Mr. Yunioshi is seen as a comic relief character, people now feel that the jokes were unnecessarily racist, since he speaks with a heavy accent and purposefully overdoes it with his facial expressions. Many people who were fans of the movie when it released have since stated that they'll never rewatch it because of the negative stereotypes, but others feel that this reaction maybe is just a bit too harsh. With certain events that have taken place in the world in the last few decades, people have started taking another look at the way that certain issues are portrayed in films, and many have come under fire for being insensitive or outright unacceptable. One of these movies is Gone with the Wind, that was released in 1939. After its release, it became one of the most popular and successful films in history, and for the next 3 decades, it sat atop the list of Hollywood box office champions. At the time, it was also one of the longest movies ever produced, with a runtime of 3 hours and 58 minutes. It's based on the best-selling novel by Margaret Mitchell, and is set in the American South while the Civil War is raging on. The main character, played by Vivien Leigh, is called Scarlett O'Hara, the daughter of a plantation owner. Set in 1861, the film begins with Scarlett hopelessly in love with a man named Ashley Wilkes, but she's dismayed at the fact that he's set to marry a woman named Melanie, who's also his cousin. Nevertheless, she tells Ashley of her feelings, but he rejects her advances. She then decides to marry Melanie's brother, Charles, and when war is declared, both men are enlisted. While serving in the military, Charles loses his life to measles, leaving Scarlett widowed. She then meets a blockade runner called Rhett, and they begin a relationship as the war continues. By this time, Melanie has fallen pregnant, and when Ashley leaves after a Christmas visit, he asks Scarlett to look after her. The war has reached Atlanta by this point, and as the city is being evacuated, Melanie goes into labor, and it's up to Scarlett and Melanie's servant Prissy to deliver the baby. The 3 women, along with Rhett, then return to the plantation, but are dismayed to find that it's been destroyed by Union soldiers. Scarlett then learns that her mother has lost her life, and that her father is in deep mourning. At the plantation, she finds that only her sisters, father, and the slaves are still there. She makes it her mission to resurrect the plantation, and she, along with her sisters, begin working the fields. It's then revealed that Rhett has been taken prisoner by the Union, and unable to find the funds to pay for the plantation, she decides to marry a man named Frank, who was her sister's boyfriend. He's able to provide her with the finances to save the plantation, after which Scarlett opens a lumber company. Frank also loses his life, and after Rhett is released, he and Scarlett get married, but she realizes she still loves Ashley. She later changes her mind, realizing that she does indeed love Rhett, but by this time, the relationship is beyond saving, and he leaves her to tend to the plantation. It'll forever be considered one of the greatest films ever made, but in modern times, many people feel that the movie's portrayal of slavery is insensitive or hurtful. In June of 2020, HBO removed Gone with the Wind from its catalog for this very reason, but was later brought back with the inclusion of videos to explain the movie's historical context. The main idea behind the plot of the movie Blood Diamond is that most people in the world are far too attached to material possessions, and that gems such as diamonds are often responsible for some of the violence that we see every day, especially in countries on the African continent. While this message is certainly true, it's taken a back seat to harsh criticisms during the last few years. The film is set in Sierra Leone, and that country has since spoken out against it for its poor portrayal of people who live there and in other African countries. The film is set during the 1990s, while Sierra Leone is embroiled in a civil war. A Zimbabwean man, played by DiCaprio, and a Mendy fisherman team up to find a rare diamond that'll change both their lives forever. As the war rages on, the Revolutionary United Front wreaks havoc in the country, and they start to capture innocent people who are then forced to harvest diamonds. These stones are used to further finance the front military's efforts. At one point, Solomon Vandy, the fisherman, finds a massive pink diamond, which he buries before it can be taken from him. He's then taken as a prisoner, along with Danny Archer, DiCaprio's character, who's accused of smuggling diamonds into Liberia, when they were actually meant for a South African man named Rudolph Van de Kaap. Vandy tells Archer about the diamond, and he manages to get them both set free. They then set about retrieving the stone with the help of an American journalist, Maddie Bowen, who's played by Jennifer Connelly. She agrees to help the pair, only if Archer promises to provide her with evidence of the illegal smuggling of diamonds. Once they arrive in Kano, they part ways with Bowen and manage to retrieve that diamond. During a skirmish, Archer is badly wounded. He tells Vandy that the diamond belongs to him now, and that he should sell it to make a better life for his family. Vandy manages to flee the area with his son by plane, and Archer calls Massey one last time before he passes away. Vandy makes it to London, where he then meets with a representative of Kaap's. He sells the diamond for a lot of money. He's reunited with his family, and Maddie takes a few photos of the deal as it happens, which are then included in her article. Thanks to this, Van Kaap is exposed as a criminal, and Vandy is hailed a hero after delivering a talk about blood diamonds in Kimberley, South Africa. The film received rave reviews upon its release, but in the 2 decades that have passed, many people feel it hasn't aged well. They've referred to a racial slur that's used by DiCaprio's character, and feel that the people of Sierra Leone are depicted as mere backdrops to the love story between Archer and Maddie. Furthermore, they've pointed out that almost every African character is presented as an antagonist or a defenseless victim. This has caused a great deal of offense. Others have criticized the film for being too graphically violent, even though it is an accurate depiction of wartime. In 1997, a woman named Denise Russell managed to capture something unusual in an unexplained moment caught on camera. The weird photo, although it looks normal at first glance, actually has a disturbing backstory. Denise was visiting her 94-year-old grandmother at a care home on a summer afternoon in 1997. Sources vary on whether Denise or her sister snapped this particular photo, but one thing reports do agree on is that Grandma Russell, whose first name is unknown, had recently moved into an assisted living facility. At a picnic in 1997, Denise went to visit her elderly relative before she passed away years later. While sharing old photos of her and reminiscing about the past, a member of the family noticed an unexplained phenomenon hidden in the background of a creepy photo taken at the retirement home. Peeking over her head is the face of an unknown man caught on camera with gray hair and a light blue shirt, who appears ghostly or overexposed by the sunlight. Denise and her relatives would have assumed he was just poorly lit were it not for a striking coincidence. The unidentified man looked exactly like her grandfather, who had passed away 13 years prior to the photo. Photos of Grandpa Russell have been posted online, and although it's difficult to compare, he does look similar to the ghostly man in the photograph. Russell family members have also pointed out that there's another ghostly image in the photo, a face that appears in the trees above the red van in the background. To some, this is proof that this unnerving image is proof of an afterlife. However, this unexplained photo could simply be a man walking by. Perhaps one of the most famous unexplained photos of all time is that of the Solway Firth spaceman. The image has been subject to a number of attempts at debunking over the years, but skeptics have never conclusively been able to prove who or what caused the mysterious appearance in this strange and scary picture caught on camera. Jim Templeton, a firefighter and local historian, was visiting Cumbria, England with his 5-year-old daughter Elizabeth and his wife Annie. Jim set himself and his daughter up on a hill and posed Elizabeth with a bouquet of flowers, and one of the 3 images of her wearing a new dress would be unnerving. When the creepy photos came back, in one of the 3, Elizabeth wasn't the only person visible. There was an ominous figure in the background of the weird photo. The unidentified individual bore an uncanny resemblance to an astronaut. Wearing an all-white suit with his or her hands on hips, the strange person appears to be caught on camera peering through a dark rectangular visor resembling a helmet. The all-white ensemble looks like a spacesuit. Jim wasn't sure what to do with the unexplained photo, so he decided to take the mystery to the local police for solving. According to his own retelling, they found nothing suspicious about the secret found in the background of this seemingly normal photo. The local paper picked up on the strange story, and it was all over the world within hours. They were instantly bombarded with thousands of tips and theories, none of which seemed plausible. The most commonly proposed explanation for the photo's backstory was first shared in 2014 by an author named David Clark. According to David, the person in the photo may have been Jim's wife, Annie, who was wearing a light blue dress that day. He theorized that the picture actually depicts Annie from behind, with her hair forming what looks like a visor. However, Jim is adamant that Annie was not within the camera's viewfinder that day. It seems there's simply no way to prove the existence of an alleged spaceman lurking in this mysterious and unexplained photo. Jim passed away in 2011 at 99 years old, without ever publicly reaching a conclusion about the unusually unnerving image. In a historic 1900 black and white photo, 15 female employees of a linen factory in Northern Ireland are posted for the camera in 4 lines. These women would wear a cord around their waist to hold various tools used to strip away the stalks of the flax plants they worked with. 14 of the 15 young women have had their hands crossed in front of them. Hidden in the background is an unexplained mystery that needs to be solved. The 15th worker at the photo's left has one arm folded on her hip. The woman on the right side of the 3rd row has a hand resting on her shoulder, but the hand doesn't belong to any of the girls in the picture. In fact, it doesn't even look like any of them are close enough to rest their hand there, even if it's physically possible. There's no one pictured who the hand could belong to, yet it's there, a disembodied hand, making an otherwise normal photo exceedingly scary. Several online attempts to debunk the image have found no forensic proof of Photoshop. The picture first gained attention when it was posted on a website called Belfast Live, documenting a historic gallery of workers in Ireland. The woman with the hand on her shoulder is identified as Ellen Donnelly, a mill employee who would have been 25 years old in 1900. Modern researchers have confirmed that census records do show Ellen was a real person who lived in the area. However, the provenance of the photo remains unsolved. Some skeptics suggest that the unexplained photo may not have been doctored by computers, but rather by historical photo editors who faked photos using a pen on film. However, because the physical image has not been located, there's no way to prove this theory is true or false. Until then, there are those who insist this mysterious and unexplained photo may really show some kind of historic ghost. This unnerving image is not actually a photo at all, but it doesn't make it any less creepy. Rather, it's a mysterious reminder that strange happenings have baffled humanity for centuries, like the unexplained mystery presented in this 15th century painting entitled The Madonna with Giovannino. Painted in the 1400s, the spectacular Renaissance work has no known source and is thought to have been worked on by 4 different painters. However, that's not what makes the artwork so unique. Hidden within this picture is an unexplained mystery in the top right corner of the painting, which some might call a cursed image. Above Mary's shoulder is a small, dark spot in the sky. The object is disc-shaped, painted in a dark bluish gray, and outlined with gold. It appears to have rays protruding from all the edges, implying it's glistening or otherwise in motion. It looks eerily similar to other documented sightings of unknown objects from space. Art historians have theorized that the object is not extraterrestrial at all. Instead, it may represent an angel taking the appearance of a luminous cloud. However, some baffled historians believe that the painting depicts a craft from some place not of our world, and that ancient Europeans may have been documenting the same kinds of unknown aerial sightings that people see today. As further evidence, art historians have theorized that the Madonna is deliberately positioning herself to shield the children in her lap from the apparition from above, which presumably she wouldn't need to do if she was not somehow threatening. However, as the original artist has long since passed away, the mystery of this unidentified flying object will never conclusively be solved. Speaking of the disturbing 18th century, another unnerving children's song, which was only published later, emerged. It was publicly recorded at the end of the century by James Orchard Halliwell, who marketed it as an English children's game, but its origins date back hundreds of years prior. It may come as a shock to some, but the innocent-seeming entertainment piece called Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush is also host to a not-so-friendly origin. The most common version starts with the stanza, Here we go round the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush. Here we go round the mulberry bush on a cold and frosty morning. Each subsequent stanza relates to alternative actions, from washing their face and combing their hair to brushing their teeth and putting on clothes. The lyrics are chanted repeatedly as the children join hands and move in a circle. They then act out the actions of the subsequent verses. But what could possibly be the disturbing backstory of this undefiled and well-liked children's nursery rhyme? Well, it turns out that Round the Mulberry Bush relates to the prison system. More specifically, its origins can be traced back to the late 1500s or early 1600s and came from the Wakefield prison. According to historian and prison governor R.S. Duncan, who oversaw the prison located in West Yorkshire, England, the nursery rhyme was allegedly conjured up by female Victorian inmates. According to him, the prisoners would gather in the mornings around a mulberry tree that was growing in the prison yard and dance around it with their children for exercise. It was during this time that the Victorian prison system had very little accommodation for women. It had been created by men, for men, and women were only considered an afterthought. The newly instated aspects of the penal system that came later on were mere modifications to the existing men's prison. Women who were convicted of crimes were considered to need saving twice, once from criminality and again from their deviance from the accepted and expected female behavior. Instead of being subjected to labor like men, they would progress through several disciplinary stages that were intended to set them on the route to reform. Prison guards had to deal with pregnant and postpartum inmates, forcing the establishment of nurseries and regulations for exercise and communication. Looking back at the lyrics to the rhyme, something began to make more sense. The lyrics suggest the actions and routine that the prison women would go through, often in the early, cold, and frosty morning. They washed their faces, combed their hair, brushed their teeth, and finally got dressed. So it turned out that Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush referred to an actual tree that ominously stood in a Victorian-era prison yard, leading to a slightly troubling nursery rhyme that would be carried through the centuries. Pop Goes the Weasel is a nursery rhyme that's as nonsensical as they come, but has been associated with the Jack-in-the-Box toys in the mid-19th century and later ice cream trucks. But if toy companies and ice cream sellers really knew the story behind it, they might not think it's as children-friendly as it initially appears. The song goes, "Up and down the city road, in and out the eagle. That's the way the money goes, Pop Goes the Weasel." It's then followed by half a pound of tuppenny rice, half a pound of treacle, mix it up and make it nice, Pop Goes the Weasel. With the last verse being every night when I go out, the monkey's on the table, take a stick and knock it off, Pop Goes the Weasel. Despite its catchy tune, the bizarre lyrics certainly don't sound anything like a child-friendly song. Nonetheless, it's this very rhyme that was chanted as one pair of dancers danced beneath the arms of other dancers without touching them. Initial interpretations of what the weasel was included a tailor's flat iron, silver plates, a deceased animal, or a hatter's tool. But none of these made perfect sense when considering the rest of the lyrics to the song. Instead, the dark truth lingering in the backstory of the rhyme has nothing to do with a tool, but rather has everything to do with poverty. The song dates back to the 1800s and was written in Cockney rhyming slang, a popular way of disguising what one was saying during the Victorian era, particularly in London's East End. Despite the disguise, some landmarks became obvious, including the Eagle, a reference to the Eagle pub, and the City Road, a popular street on which the pub was located. It becomes obvious that the singers are regular visitors to said pub, which is where the small amount of money they made gets spent. Weasel, in Cockney shorthand, refers to weasel and stowed, meaning coat. Coat, paired with the word pop, a colloquial 19th century word meaning to pawn, hence the term pop shop referring to pawnbrokers. These words, used in conjunction with one another, paint the picture of pawning off a coat to get some extra change. Trading a coat for food ultimately verifies the harrowing dilemma of choosing between eating and staying clothed. Staying true to the impoverished trend was the term tuppenny rice and treacle. Tuppenny, meaning 2 pennies, was the cost for 1 pound of rice pudding, and 1 pound of treacle, a sugary syrup, acting as a topping to make it taste better. So the lyricist saying half a pound of tuppenny rice, half a pound of treacle, implies they had less silver to spend on food, having pawned their coat for not much value, and having little money to start off with. Rice at the time was one of the cheapest food items for the less fortunate. With money being spent on food and drink, it's easy to see where "that's the way the money goes" lyrics come from. During this time, the working class of London labored hard for very little pay, most of which went to bland food. The workers, though, found themselves with an extra penny or two, having pawned the weasel and stoat, and decided to spend it on the only other thing getting them by, a pint or two, where glazed beer mugs became monkeys and a stick became a shot of rum. By the time the night was over, the silver coins were gone, but that's the way the money goes. Much like Ba Ba Black Sheep, London Bridge is another classic. Again, it appeared as just another simple song for children to hum as they passed through the archway made by the connected arms of 2 other children, continuing as such until one of them was caught in the bridge, an action that will become relevant when we hear the disturbing backstory associated with this nursery rhyme. The song begins with the verse, "London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady," with each subsequent verse offering an alternative building method to prevent the bridge from falling. In order, the verses state to, quote, "build it up with wood and clay," but wood and clay would be washed away by the rain. So instead, they suggested build it up with silver and gold, but there wasn't enough silver or gold to be able to build a whole bridge. They then suggested build it up with iron bars, which would bend and break. The song repeats this pattern throughout, with some added non-bridge related lyrics, until the final word, bridge, allows the archway makers to abruptly lower their arms, capturing one of the players who are passing beneath the structure. With this information in mind, we now explore the unnerving backstory, laced with human sacrifice and a dash of immurement. Unsurprisingly, the first publicized version of the song came about in the mid-1800s, with evidence suggesting that it dates back to the medieval era. According to one researcher, the origins of London Bridge is falling down may refer to medieval punishment called immurement, during which a person is enclosed in a room with no openings or exits and is left there to suffer until their demise. "Take the key and lock her up" serves as a nod to this inhumane practice. Immurement, though, wasn't just a form of punishment, it was a human sacrifice. It's been suggested that during the medieval period, people believed that the bridge would collapse if there wasn't a body buried within. The rhyme may be indicating that no man-made or natural material would be strong enough to keep the structure standing, and human sacrifice was needed to ensure its stability. Adding another layer of disturbance to this idea was that those sacrifices were youthful residents of London. This ultimately makes the actions of the game and the lyrics of the song particularly unnerving. Children pass under the bridge, suggestive of the idea that there are humans buried beneath it. Or, given the capture at the end of the song, it suggests that one of them was specifically chosen to be encased within the foundation. This disturbing idea alleges that London Bridge is a mass grave, evidence of which surfaced in 2007 when an insane amount of human remains were found during excavation efforts. Even more disturbingly, those remains were found encased beneath a concrete floor. During most of our childhoods, we sat with the classic nursery rhymes by Chris Riddell open on our laps, in search of our favorite ditties. Some we merely skipped over, others we paid more attention to. For many, that one children's song with only a few lines made us pause. It was Little Miss Muffet, the most well-known short poem of them all. Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet, eating her curds and whey. Along came a spider who sat down beside her and frightened Miss Muffet away. Distracting us from the question, what is curd, was the silly illustration of a Victorian-era dressed toddler tumbling off her seat and a spider sitting innocently dangling nearby. It seemed like a simple story. Miss Muffet, a young girl, had taken her obscure pudding to a quiet place to eat, only to come face to face with an 8-legged critter, causing her to spill her food and run away. Despite its simplistic delivery, there were still many questions that lingered. Who was Miss Muffet, and why was she so terrified of spiders? It turns out that the answer to these questions is far darker than anyone would imagine. The first printed version of this nursery rhyme dates back to 1805, although the classical lyrics are believed to be much older, with one origin story tracing back to the time of a physician, an entomologist. Muffet, much to our surprise, is a real last name, not one simply made up for the purpose of a rhyme scheme. Dr. Thomas Muffet was a 16th century physician who also studied insects, more specifically arachnids. The Englishman supposedly believed that eating spiders could cure all sorts of diseases. The doctor conveniently had a daughter, Patience Muffet, whom he would experiment on. Allegedly, he would crush up the spiders and feed them to his daughter when she was suffering from a cold. It's unknown if these scientific endeavors ever proved useful, but given that spiders don't appear in the ingredients list in modern medicine, it's safe to assume the experiments were not successful. Thomas also allegedly fed spiders to his patients, believing that they would be cured. But he wasn't the only one who believed that this would cure ailments. This method was the consensus of the time, leading some to carry spiders in a nutshell whenever they had a fever, or swallow a spider wrapped up in a ball of butter. With this dark backstory, it's easy to see why Miss Muffet would become so startled when she came face to face with a spider. She'd become increasingly fearful of them due to the unethical treatments she was subjected to. In fact, many of Thomas's patients were fearful of the insects he kept, which supposedly encouraged him to look into the potential medicinal properties that they may possess. Another classic nursery rhyme with an equally short layout is the simple yet ambiguous "It's raining, it's pouring." The rhyme went as follows: "It's raining, it's pouring, the old man is snoring. He went to bed and bumped his head and couldn't get up in the morning." At first, it seemed like some sort of rain dance, either to bring the downpour or to chase it away. The old man had a nap on a rainy day, got up, bumped his head, and then tried to sleep off his injury. It was catchy and concise, but that lyric was really implying something far more sinister. At the time, we were too young to understand the true darkness of the children's song. Instead of being a source of entertainment for the youth, "It's raining, it's pouring" served as more of a cautionary tale, with a far more serious backstory than a jolly jig. It was a very early medical public service announcement, warning the public of the dangers of head injuries. The seemingly innocent rhyme was really just a description of an extradural hematoma, also known as an acute hemorrhage that led to drowsiness. But simple drowsiness wouldn't stop someone from waking up again, and it's this realization that leads to a sinister conclusion. The old man didn't wake up because he's no longer alive. Today, it's widely known that falling asleep after suffering a head injury can be completely fatal. At the time this rhyme was published, medical professionals were desperately trying to warn the public of this fact, cautioning them not to go to sleep after bumping their head for fear they may never wake up again. Given the fact that it's extremely difficult to track down a singular origin point of anything, especially nursery rhymes, an alternative beginning for "It's raining, it's pouring" stems from cautions against alcoholism. The rhyme has nothing to do with the weather at all, but rather a good couple of drinks, which are being poured liberally, taking the form of cocktails and jugs of beer. This suggests that the old man is likely intoxicated when trying to stumble to his bed, causing him to hit his head and subsequently lead to his untimely demise. When he suffered an intoxicated event or drowsily banged his head, one thing is for certain about this old man: he wasn't going to wake up again, making for a particularly dark children's poem. But it did serve as a double warning, even though we didn't understand it. Don't drink too much so that you injure yourself, and don't go to sleep after having suffered a head injury. In 1998, this seemingly normal photo with the creepy backstory was snapped shortly before the unexpected ending of 29 lives on Market Street in County Tyrone, Northern Ireland. This was one of the darkest moments of a dark historical time known as the Troubles, a roughly 30-year time period when the Irish Republican Army was trying to force the Irish government to claim independence from British rule. The dark and disturbing photograph, taken just a few moments before the infamous attack, depicts a normal afternoon in the picturesque small town. A pair of Spanish tourists pose in the market street. A man wearing a yellow sweater with a child on his shoulders. A red car in the background is parked at the side of the road. As the creepy backstory goes, the vintage car had been rigged by the IRA to go off shortly after this unnerving image was caught on camera. The man and the child pictured in this creepy photo both survived, but the person who caught this image on camera did not. The camera itself was later recovered from the rubble after the events. No single person was ever held criminally responsible for the horrifying attack that changed so many lives forever. A Republic of Ireland citizen named Colm Murphy was initially arrested, but had his conviction overturned in 2005 because evidence was mishandled and tampered with in his case. Of all the scary photos on the internet about this attack, this single picture remains one of the scariest. These old images show lyricist Howard Ashman and composer Alan Menken winning a 1989 Academy Award for Best Original Score for the Little Mermaid hit song Under the Sea. However, these photos have a very strange and unexpected backstory that shocked all involved. On this night, what was one of Howard's proudest career achievements was simultaneously his darkest moments. Shortly after the photo was taken, Howard told Alan that they'd also unfortunately needed to have a serious talk. As their true story goes, while working on the production of The Little Mermaid, Howard Ashman had been diagnosed with HIV, which was untreatable back then. Howard chose to focus on his work and did not tell Alan about his condition until after the 1989 Oscars. The entire time they had written and performed the hit song together, Howard knew that he only had a short time to live. The bittersweet photograph is sadly one of the last photos of Howard, though he and Alan continued to work on music and lyrics for Beauty and the Beast, and then 1992's Aladdin, even while Howard was bedbound. Alan recalls writing the intricate lyrics to Prince Ali while Howard was in a hospital bed at St. Vincent's. In 1992, Beauty and the Beast was nominated for 3 Oscars, including Best Picture. Tragically, Howard would not get to see his film win. On June 5, 1989, Associate Press photographer Jeff Widener caught on camera one of the most famous images of all time from the 6th floor of his Beijing hotel room. A then unknown businessman known as Tank Man, who would change the world by giving his life to highlight the wrongdoings of his government. In this scary photo, the man is standing in front of a massive armored tank. The haunting image would become an iconic representation of the Tiananmen Square protests in China. But although the photo is famous around the world, it wasn't until 2009 that a new angle on this historic event was released, allowing viewers a chance to better understand the historic events that took place. The second vintage photo, taken by Terrell Jones, seems like an ordinary example of a city square. 3 men are photographed. One is on their bicycle, one is simply smiling, and the other person is ducking under rounds and running for cover. The famous Tank Man is hidden in the background, and the approaching tanks are far away as well. Moments later, history would be made in a terrifying way that the world would never forget. This unsettling photo of Harold Anew, a top American physicist, doesn't look creepy. Wearing a short-sleeved shirt and shorts, he grins into the camera. In his right hand, he holds a small box. It could almost be a photo of a man and his lunch, unless of course you know the disturbing backstory behind this image. The box Harold is holding is the plutonium core of the Nagasaki Fat Man atomic bomb. Just a few months after the photo was taken, the core would be the direct end of the lives of more than 70,000 people. Harold was one of many scientists working on the Manhattan Project at the Los Alamos National Laboratory during World War II. With the Fat Man, a dense plutonium core was placed at the center that, when ignited, released a shock wave that the war had never seen. It is this core, weighing about 14 pounds, that Harold is holding in the photo. A single gram of the matter inside the core would be converted into a force equivalent to 21,000 tons of TNT. The decision to use this device remains one of history's greatest horror stories. However, some US military advisors and some scientists, like Dr. Anu, believed it was necessary to end the war. In 1992, he remarked, quote, "We did pretty good. We brought a quick end to a devastating war and maintained the peace, and eventually saw democracy prevail. That's something you can hang your hat on." Harold Anu witnessed the dropping of the first atomic bomb on Japan, the Little Boy, on August 6, 1945. He took notes on the size of the shock wave and caught it on a home camera. Afterwards, he had a distinguished scientific career in nuclear technology. He would pass away in 2013 at the age of 92. The legend of the Maryland Goat Man originated from two different tales. The first claims that it was once a man, but after his flock was destroyed by teenagers, he went mad and transformed into the legendary beast. Another claims that a scientist working at the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center was performing research on a goat when one of his experiments backfired and he was transformed into a half-man, half-goat. The creature is described as having the face of a human, but body covered in hair. On its head, there's said to grow a pair of horns with which it aggressively attacks vehicles that drive close by. Some legends hold that it walks with an axe in hand, looking for any unsuspecting prey that may come across its path. A man known only as Ryan claims to have had one of these mysterious creature sightings with two creepy photos as proof. He was attending the GRC Summit in the District of Columbia, and on the 23rd of March, 2016, he was playing tennis at a nearby park. As he was packing up to leave, he and his friends saw something at the edge of the forest at the park's border. He quickly took out his phone to take a photo, and as he got ready to do so, the creature stood up on 2 feet. This surprised him as he was sure that it was a goat. A few moments later, it dropped down to all fours again and disappeared into the thick woods. Ryan says that he was about 30 yards away from the creature, and even from a distance, he could tell that it was about 7 feet tall when standing on its hind legs. When he recounted his experience to others later on, they told him about the legend of the Goat Man, and he contacted a Baltimore news agency. But he was told that it looked like a bear holding a goat. Ryan insists, however, that what he saw was neither a bear nor a goat. The first reported sighting of a Mothman occurred on the 15th of November, 1966. Two couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry, along with Steve and Mary Mallett, reported to police that they saw a large gray creature with glowing red eyes in the headlights of their car while driving in the TNT area of Maryland. At first, they didn't know what to make of it, but when the creature started following their vehicle, they noticed that it had a human body with 10-foot-long wings. Over the next few days, more sightings of the creature were reported, with two volunteer firemen describing it as a large bird with red eyes. George Johnson, the Mason County Sheriff at the time, stated that he believed the creature to be a large heron called a shitepoke. One man went as far as to blame the creature for a buzzing noise coming from his television and the disappearance of his German Shepherd. In September of 2020, a United States Postal Service veteran of 15 years reported that she was walking to her car after finishing her shift when she saw a man in an oversized coat staring at her. When she unlocked her vehicle, the headlights fell on the man and she realized that it was in fact a red-eyed creature, standing about 7 feet tall, and what she thought was a coat was actually a pair of wings. The creature screeched at her, ran towards her, and took to the sky, causing her to flee in her car. But in 2016, a man from Point Pleasant managed to capture a creepy photo of the creature. He was driving along State Route 2 when he saw something jump from tree to tree next to the road. He pulled over to take some photos and realized that it had human legs and wings with pointed tips. Some believe that sightings of the Mothman are a bad omen and that disasters are imminent after each sighting. Many claim that the Mothman was seen right before the collapse of the Point Pleasant Silver Bridge in 1967. Hook Island is located off the coast of Queensland, Australia, and is known for being an excellent snorkeling and diving destination due to the coral growths that are found there. But it also has a mysterious legend connected to it, that of the Hook Island monster. The first sighting and photograph of the monster was reported in March of 1965 by a man named Robert Laserick. The previous year, he and his family were on vacation with a friend on the Whitsunday Islands, part of which is made up by Hook Island. The family was out on the water in a motorboat, and as they crossed a bay off the coast of Hook Island, they spotted a dark shape under the surface of the water, close to the bay floor. Upon closer inspection, they saw that it was a tadpole-like creature, partially covered with sand. They estimated that it was about 30 feet long, and as they approached, Robert managed to get the mysterious creature sighting on camera. Summoning all of his courage, he ventured into the water to try and film the creature. But as he got closer, he realized it was much bigger than they thought at first, and he estimated it to be about 70 feet long. He thought that the creature might be dead as it wasn't moving, but as he approached, it opened its huge mouth and started swimming towards him. He noticed that the creature's tail was damaged, possibly by a ship propeller, and that the head was at least 4 feet from top to bottom, with jaws about 4 feet wide. He also claims to have noted that its skin was similar to that of a shark before he swam back to the boat as quickly as he could. He and the rest of his crew then watched in astonishment as it swam away and left the bay. Many people believe that Robert faked the photo and that he was, in fact, a known con man who was wanted by Interpol. But many others hold fast that the monster is indeed real and swims beneath the waters of Hook Bay to this day. A local tourist in the Chiangbai Mountain claims to have been lucky enough to get a creature sighting caught on camera in 2005. 52-year-old Zhang Chenchun was hiking in the western side of the mountain with his daughter and son-in-law when they saw a strange black object break the surface of the water in the middle of the lake below. He shouted out that there was a monster in the water and says that all the tourists in the area stopped to stare at the creature swimming in the calm lake. He immediately grabbed his camcorder and managed to capture the sighting on film. He says that when they reached the top of the mountain at around 10 a.m., the lake was covered with a thick fog and they were unable to see the water. Shortly after, however, the fog suddenly gave way to sunshine, and that's when they spotted the creature in the water. In the footage, which lasts for about a minute, a black object is seen breaking the surface of the water 3 times in roughly the same area. Each time, it can only be seen above the water briefly, and after it dives down for a 3rd time, it disappears and does not breach the water's surface again. He described the creature's head to be about the size of an ox and noticed that every time it surfaced, it caused huge ripples in the water, suggesting that its body might be massive. The lake is about 1,200 feet deep, and legends of the monster date back to over a century ago. Over the last 20 years, there have been more than 30 reported sightings of the Tianqi monster, and many photos as well as videos have been taken, but none are as clear as the footage taken by Zhang. The closest was a 20-minute video taken by a reporter from a local television station. He was on top of the mountain to film the sunrise when one of his guides spotted something in the lake. When he zoomed in, he realized that it was not 1, but 6 of the creatures swimming together. He says they watched the creatures frolicking in the lake for about an hour and a half before they dove beneath the surface and swam away. He described them as having fins that are longer than their bodies, and they could swim as fast as a yacht. Another classic rhyme that has come to be ruined by the truth is Peter, Peter, Pumpkin Eater. Of course, it sounded very childlike and whimsical, certainly playing on a child's active imagination. The lyrics were suggestive of a great big pumpkin, one that was able to house a whole human. Making it even more fanciful was the endless supply of food, even if it was just one type of food. The rhyme was short and sweet, but certainly wasn't bland. Peter, Peter, Pumpkin Eater had a wife but couldn't keep her. He put her in a pumpkin shell, and there he kept her very well. At face value, it was innocent, wholesome even. Little did we know of the sinister story that lurked in the background. The earliest surviving version of the rhyme came from infant institutes, or a nursery essay on the poetry, lyric, and allegorical. Unsurprisingly, those early publications dated back to the 18th century in London, first appearing as though Peter's wife keeps running away, forcing him to keep her in a carved-out pumpkin where she'd be safe. This is certainly not the case. In an effort to understand the meaning behind the bizarre story, some scholars suggested unfaithfulness and a pumpkin shell serving as a euphemism for a medieval device specifically designed for women. The reality, though, is far more troubling and suggests something as sinister as homicide. Unimpressed by his wife's supposed choices of running away, possibly implying that she was a lady of the night, he decides that enough is enough, no more being married to a wayward woman. So Peter supposedly grabbed a weapon of sorts and struck his wife. He then either dismembered her or placed her in a literal pumpkin shell, or that pumpkin shell may refer to a hiding place. The verse's ending, "There he kept her very well," implies no one would ever find Peter's wife's body. The nursery rhyme, though, doesn't end there. Throughout history, the second part of the song seemingly became lost. There was, in fact, another verse. Instead, the full song read, quote, "Peter, Peter, pumpkin eater, had a wife but couldn't keep her. He put her in a pumpkin shell and there he kept her very well. Peter, Peter, pumpkin eater, had another and didn't love her. So up the chimney he did shove her." Not only did Peter take his first wife's life and hide her body, but he also remarried. Unimpressed by his new wife, he decided that he would just take her life too, and that he did. This time, though, instead of dismemberment, he would stuff her remains in the chimney shaft. It's unknown as to who wrote the poem, or if they'd been the ones to witness the crimes, but never said anything about it. Alternative versions of the nursery rhyme suggest the story is being told from the point of view of a neighbor. Regardless of where this song comes from, it certainly wasn't meant for the youth. Peter, Peter, pumpkin eater culminates how not everything is what it seems, particularly nursery rhymes with origins in London or in the 18th century, or London during the 18th century. The Beatles remains one of the most famous rock and roll bands of all time, and likely will remain so for many decades to come. The band was formed in Liverpool, England in 1962, when Ringo Starr, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison decided to start making music together, and what followed forever changed the way people looked at popular music. At first, the band opted for a pop style, with songs such as She Loves You and I Saw Her Standing There, but they soon changed their sound as they became more adept at playing their instruments and looked to incorporate more meaningful lyrics into their songs. Before long, other types of music started influencing their sound, including folk, country, psychedelia, and love ballads. The band's career together spanned just 7 years, but during that time, they released 12 studio albums and left behind a legacy that's still very much alive today. Many of the most famous artists and bands of the modern era have stated that they would have never followed a career in music or reached the success they did were it not for the fact that they were influenced by the Beatles and their iconic sound. Their songs are still played by radio stations around the world today, and while Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney are the only surviving members, their record sales are still sky high and show no signs of slowing down. Most of their songs have an upbeat feel, with positive lyrics about love, life, and everything in between. But one track seems to go the opposite way, and it's likely because of this that John Lennon, its author, stated that he never enjoyed playing it, and it was by far his least favorite of all the songs that they had written. The song in question is entitled Run for Your Life, and it was inspired by an Elvis Presley song, which was in turn written about another artist called Arthur Gunter. The Elvis Presley song was called Baby Let's Play House, and was inspired by a country song written by Cy Coben called I Want to Play House with You, which was then recorded by Eddie Arnold. The original song's lyrics make it obvious that the singer wants to move in with the woman he loves, a romantic sentiment, but Run for Your Life takes a much darker turn, as it centers on the subject of jealousy and a possessive nature. Lennon decided to reuse the lyrics that Presley sang in his version, and while they may have gone unnoticed back then, they've angered many people who now realize what the song was really about and how dark the subject matter really is. Again, the lyrics are very straightforward, and it's hard to understand why they're only now causing offense, since they clearly state, try to understand, "I'd rather see you dead than to be with another man." There's no ambiguity in these words, and it's obvious that a man has grown jealous after his girlfriend left him. Rather than letting her go and continuing on with his life, he decides that he'd rather end her life than see her happy with someone else. During her music career, Amy Winehouse became a favorite of tabloid magazines and gossip websites, thanks to her struggles with addiction and alcohol, paired with several tempestuous relationships that played out before the eyes of the public. Amy grew up in London and was raised by her mother, after her parents got divorced when she was 9 years old. From a young age, she showed signs of her rebellious nature, as she was expelled from the Sylvia Young Theatre School for wearing a nose ring, something that was strictly forbidden. Nevertheless, the incident did little to curb her love for the arts, and she started studying at the Brit School, which is a prestigious school for the performing arts. She showed an interest in jazz, and at the age of 16 joined a jazz band. This sound remained an influence throughout her career, and in 2003, she released her debut album called Frank. One of the tracks from the album, Stronger Than Me, won a Novello Award, but she stated on many occasions that she was not fond of the album and didn't even own a copy of it. Her second album, Back to Black, was heavily inspired by her relationship with Blake Fielder Civil. The couple would break up and get back together on several occasions, and by this time, it had become obvious that she was struggling with an addiction to illegal substances and alcohol. Hence, the inclusion of the track Rehab came as no surprise, but her fans were taken aback when she started making appearances in the aftermath of the record's success, since she looked very different than she had in the past. She now had many tattoos and had lost a lot of weight, leaving her looking emaciated and weak. Speculation started to run rife that she was sick, or that she was struggling with mental health issues, but in reality, Winehouse was slowly succumbing to her addictions. She and Fielder Civil got married in 2007, but from there, things only got worse. She started behaving strangely and was forced to cancel many of her performances as she continued on with her reliance to substances. She'd now been diagnosed with bulimia, and when she made it to her shows, she was often too inebriated to perform properly. She was arrested in Norway after it was discovered she was carrying an illegal substance, and Fielder Civil was arrested for getting into an altercation with someone in a bar. Nevertheless, Back to Black won 5 Grammy Awards, but Winehouse had to appear remotely since she was unable to obtain a visa after being caught on camera ingesting an illegal substance. Ironically, one of the songs that won a Grammy was the track Rehab, in which Winehouse expresses her refusal to seek help at a rehabilitation center, despite being urged to do so by her loved ones. She eventually relented, and after realizing she wouldn't live much longer if she continued the way she was, she decided to enter a rehab facility. But she only remained there for a short time, and as soon as she left, her old habits returned. She and Fielder Civil got divorced in 2009, and she then started planning a comeback tour in 2011 that was highly anticipated by many of her fans. She'd been given a second chance, but failed to take advantage of it, since at the very first show, she was heavily intoxicated, and the remainder of the dates were canceled. Just a month later, she was found unresponsive, and she was declared deceased, having suffered from alcohol poisoning. To say that Taylor Swift is a popular musician would be a massive understatement. She's broken the world record for the highest-grossing concert tour of all time, earning as much as $2 billion during her global Eras tour. She sold more than 114 million albums worldwide and has cemented herself as one of the greatest pop stars of all time. Her songs have been streamed more than 70 billion times on different streaming platforms, and that number only grows every day. Swift showed an interest in performing from an early age, as she first acted in children's theater productions before singing the Star-Spangled Banner at the Philadelphia 76ers basketball game in front of a capacity crowd. She then took an interest in playing the guitar and started composing her first original songs after taking inspiration from her musical idols, Shania Twain and the Dixie Chicks. She eventually landed her first recording contract with Sony in 2004 and started performing in the Nashville area. Her self-titled debut album was released when she was just 16, and by 2007, it had sold more than 1 million copies in the US alone. Her sound started to lean more towards pop music on her second album, Fearless, which was released in 2008, and it sold over 500,000 units in just the first week after its release. She gained even more international recognition when she was interrupted by rapper Kanye West during her acceptance speech at the MTV Music Video Awards, since he believed Beyoncé should have won instead. She's since won several Grammy Awards, appeared in movies, and has since gained a reputation for being very frank about her relationships and her lyrics. Her song "We're Never Getting Back Together" became her first #1 hit on the Billboard Pop Singles chart. In 2016, she and Kanye West started feuding after he included a lyric about Swift in one of his songs, and she criticized the track for being misogynistic. But some critics have pointed out that this was a hypocritical view, since she released the song "Picture to Burn," which also contains a derogatory line on her 2006 debut album. Swift wrote the song in the aftermath of a breakup, and in an effort to declare her independence of her ex, she included the line which she says is now very regrettable, since it reads, "So go and tell your friends that I'm obsessive and crazy. That's fine, I'll tell mine that you're gay." She's since stated that were she to write the song today, she would have approached it very differently, and that particular line has since been changed. But the original track still exists on all the physical copies of the album, and hence it can't be erased. It's since come to light that the track was written about Jordan Alford, whom Swift dated while in high school. While he didn't appreciate being painted as what he calls a redneck in the song, Alford and his wife, Chelsea, have stated that they weren't offended by the lyric, and that they instead found it rather humorous. The fact that a song written by the British punk band the Sex Pistols has drawn criticism should come as no surprise, as the band is known for their controversial lyrics and anarchic behavior, as is often the case in punk culture. These days, the national anthem of England is known as "God Save the King," as King Charles III has taken over the throne. But for 133 years before Charles was crowned, it was known as "God Save the Queen," since the country was first ruled by Queen Victoria, and following her, Queen Elizabeth II. One would do well not to offend a country by mocking its national anthem, but the Sex Pistols seemingly couldn't care less when they released their song "God Save the Queen" in 1977, and almost immediately it sparked outrage, and it's easy to see why. The very first lyrics of the song read, quote, "God save the Queen, the fascist regime. They made you a moron, a potential H-bomb," which is controversial to say the least. The song then claims that the Queen is not a human being and that England has no future, which understandably drew the ire of many people who demanded that it be banned from being played on the radio. On the 31st of May, 1977, the BBC announced that the song had been banned and that it would no longer be played on the corporation's radio stations. But since the band's fans reveled in such controversy, the ban had the opposite of the desired effect, and the record sales started to soar. Some people felt that the band members should be arrested and put on trial for treason, while others went even further, stating they wanted the group to be executed for insulting the country's matriarch. The BBC released a statement in which they labeled the song as a good example of gross bad taste, and soon retailers, including Woolworths, refused to stock the album on which the song appeared. They felt that if the album was seen for sale on their store shelves, it might lead to the British public to believe they were supporting the band's view of the Queen and England in general, and hence decided to protect themselves against such misconceptions. But stores that kept the album for sale reported that it was selling faster than ever, and at one point more than 150,000 copies were being sold every day. The track reached #2 on the official UK pop charts, though the name was never printed on the charts due to its negative message and the nature of the band's name. This only further exacerbated the situation, as the band sought to cause even more controversy. They chose the time to do this to coincide with the Queen's Silver Jubilee, and along with the owner of Virgin Records, Richard Branson, they hired a boat and set sail on the River Thames. They loaded a set of massive speakers onto the vessel and attempted to play the song as loudly as possible for all to hear, but the police soon received several complaints. They chased the boat down the river, and once the band decided to dock, all the passengers on board were taken into custody. The band only had a very short career together that lasted just 3 years, but the impact of their rebellious music is still remembered today, even if for all the wrong reasons, which is just the way punk musicians would like to be remembered. The Wolf of Wall Street, a film that was released in 2013, is based on the memoirs of Jordan Belfort, a stockbroker who was involved with some very shady dealings during his career. This led to his being arrested and sent to prison, but not before the details of his lavish and illicit lifestyle were exposed for the world to see. Even though the film is based on real-life events, many people feel that it went too far in glorifying Belfort's actions, and as a result it was ultimately banned in several countries as soon as it was released. In other parts of the world, it opened to critical acclaim, and it made a massive amount of money at the box office. This is likely because Belfort's case was well known to the public, who wanted to learn more about his shady dealings and deception. Belfort was responsible for losing his investors over $200 million after he committed securities fraud, and he was sentenced to 4 years in prison, but he only served 22 months of that time. His sentence was reduced after he agreed to testify against his accomplices, and in 2006, he walked out of prison a free man. The film was directed by Martin Scorsese and stars Leonardo DiCaprio as Belfort, who founded the company called Stratton Oakmont. It contains humorous elements, illegal substances, bad language, and of course, the theft of other people's money. Hence, many places in the world refused to screen it. The Nepalese government decided it contained a moral degradation and that it could have a negative influence on young people. Malaysia felt it was too explicit to be screened, and India agreed to show the movie only after 7 minutes of footage had been cut from the original version. In Singapore, the film was screened, but it was rated as R21, and certain scenes were edited to remove unwanted content, such as nudity. It was initially banned in Indonesia, but it was later released after being heavily censored due to it containing too many excesses of vices such as the use of illegal substances. These are all very valid points, but the film also received criticism in other countries for its record-breaking use of expletives. One popular swear word was used a staggering 569 times, and at the time of its release, it held the record for that word being uttered. In defense of the film, screenwriter Terrence Winter stated that the people on whom the film was based were accustomed to swearing a lot, and hence that word was used that many times in order to keep the movie as authentic as possible. Scorsese was forced to cut some scenes even in the US because of the amount of profanity used, and only after this was done was the film's rating downgraded from NC-17 to R. As for its depiction of moral degradation and excess, Scorsese defended the film, stating that these were events that really happened, and hence he felt that they needed to be included to accurately portray the lifestyle that Belfort had led. In 1984, the world was introduced to the creatures known as the Gremlins for the first time. It's one of 2 films that resulted in the creation of the PG-13 rating, along with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Back in the early 80s, only 4 movie ratings existed, namely G, PG, R, or X. X has now been replaced with the NC-17 rating, and today a PG film is deemed appropriate for children, whereas back in the day this rating was reserved for general audiences. The film starts with a man called Billy Peltzer receiving a small creature called a mogwai for Christmas, but he quickly breaks the 3 rules of keeping the creature as a pet, and before long his hometown of Kingston Falls is inundated with gremlins that spawn from Gizmo, his pet. What follows is a series of chaotic events that often include gory scenes and other forms of violence, such as explosions and the discharge of firearms. The film's protagonists do their best to capture or end the lives of the gremlins as quickly as possible, but before this is done, the gremlins' chaotic nature is on full display. The movie was marketed as a horror comedy, and there's no doubt that this was indeed the case. But as soon as it was released, parents started complaining that it was too gory and violent for their children to watch. They felt that its rating may have been appropriate for teenagers, but not for young children. And before long, director Steven Spielberg suggested a solution. He contacted Jack Valenti, the president of the Motion Picture Association of America, and suggested that a new rating between PG and R be created. Spielberg agreed that the rating was not appropriate for children, but also felt that an R rating would be too harsh. Valenti saw his point, started lobbying for the new rating, and before long it was implemented. But many people felt that this came too late and that the damage had already been done, Children who had seen the film were complaining about having nightmares, and some stated they found the visuals in the movie to be extremely disturbing. This was thanks to a few particular scenes, such as the one where a gremlin ends up in a blender, and seeing an opportunity to end its life, Billy's mother turns it on, leading to a very gruesome scene. In another, an elderly woman's stair lift is sabotaged by the creatures, and when she uses it, it moves up the stairway at incredible speed, resulting in her being launched through the air and out of a window. Then there's the mention of one of the character's fathers who went missing one year just before Christmas. The character Kate reveals that this is why she refuses to celebrate Christmas, and goes on to explain that when the police conducted a search of their house in hopes of finding her father, he was found deceased after getting stuck in the chimney, dressed as Santa Claus. It's easy to see why many parents were upset about the film's rating, and why it caused further outrage when a range of Gremlin dolls were released and marketed directly to children, along with other types of merchandise such as video games.
Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.